accordance with the provisions of the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act, the Highland Park Board of Education has given adequate notice of this meeting by having published the date, time, and place of this meeting in the Home News Tribune and has posted notice of this meeting at Bartle School, 435 Mansfield Street, Highland Park, New Jersey. Linda, could we have a roll call, please?
Ms. Aversa?
Here.
Ms. Berkowitz?
Here.
Ms. Bull?
Here.
Ms. Simarusti?
Here.
Mr. Dietz? Mr. Ross?
Here.
Ms. Scherber?
Here.
Mr. Sherman?
Here.
Mr. Wharton?
Here.
Could everyone please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We need a motion for the approval of the April 28th regular public and executive session minutes and the May 5th regular public and executive session minutes.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on either of those? Linda?
Ms. Aversa?
Yes to April 28th, but abstain from May 5th,
We didn't do that.
right? Did I say the wrong date?
Oh, you did it.
Yes,
No, that's
to
right.
April 28th,
Yeah.
abstain from May. Ms. Berkowitz?
Yes to April 28th, abstain from May 5th.
Ms. Bull?
Yes.
Ms. Simarusti?
Yes to April 28th, abstain to May 5th.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Ms. Scherber?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Wharton?
Yes.
Oh, that was loud.
Linda, are there any communications?
The board did receive several emails since the last meeting on a variety of subjects. I also wanted to announce that the board candidate packets are now available in the business office for anyone wishing to run for the school board election in November. The paperwork is due to be submitted to the county clerk's office by 4 p.m. on July 28th. I will announce this probably at every meeting until then. Also, the New Jersey School Boards has announced the dates and location of their annual workshop. It'll be in Atlantic City once again this year, running from October 28th through 30th. So if any board members are interested in attending, please contact the business office. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Tim?
Start with the student update.
Recently, within the high school, the robotics team participated in the regional and national competition. At the regional competition, they placed first overall, which is quite exceptional considering this is a first-year team. They also received first place for the engineering journal, second place for the driving competition, and third place for their poster. They've also been quite helpful in helping the Bartle School robotics team and just participating with that. And on June 8th, there will be a science and technology fair where a junior Lego League competition will take place. Also, the high school DECA chapter recently went to Atlanta, Georgia for the national competition, and there were 6 international finalists, as well as a national DECA scholarship winner, Oscar Lee, and the students and staff had a wonderful experience. Also, the media specialist, Ms. Puccio, will be honored as a Middlesex County Teacher of the Year on June 2nd at the Patriots Stadium in Bridgewater, New Jersey. A reading incentive was given to the high school and middle school students, and in return, those who accomplished this would receive 2 baseball tickets to use during the season. And finally, on June 9th, at 7 p.m. in the high school auditorium, there will be the National Honor Society induction ceremony for the newly selected members, and this could be both juniors and seniors.
Thank you. So over the course of this year, obviously there have been quite a number of changes, and we've been talking a lot about the areas that we can make greater improvements for our students. So what we're trying to highlight tonight is not only the strategic plan and the information that came out of that, but in addition to that, trying to make sure that there's a clearer picture as far as where it is that we were as a district, what some of the concerns have been, and how we're addressing them moving forward. So starting at the beginning of the year, we've talked about some of the areas of concern and the steps that we're going to take to improve them. We're going to review the historical student proficiency on a district-wide basis, review the vision statements and the strategic plan, and then looking at the next steps. Some of the concerns when I arrived here, things that I heard from staff, from students, from parents, was about the tracking at Bartle School. Starting in 3rd grade, we had students were segregated into different classes based on ability, and that was a concern as far as what the long-term implications were. In addition to that, again, through the conversations with staff, we talked about the benchmarking, that we had everything from Study Island to a number of different reading programs, and one of the big concerns had been that this was not directly tied to the instruction that they provided in the class. And so there was a mismatch between what they taught and what was being tested, and it didn't give you good information on student progress. And so because of that, there wasn't student data that was readily available to those teachers. So things that we did: we eliminated the tracking system, we grouped the students heterogeneously, we started with looking at the benchmarking systems and have moved to Fontes and Pinnell as far as a K-8 longitudinal benchmarking system. And we're starting to look at student level data and being able to provide more information on students so that teachers on a day-to-day basis can look to see what their skill levels are and make adjustments as need be. Other areas of concern: the curriculum was incomplete and it was not aligned to the Common Core standards. This was a huge concern of ours based on the fact that this was supposed to have been done a couple of years ago, and so with the standardized testing, now testing the Common Core standards and us not having fully implemented it, this is something that has been an ongoing issue, especially when we were looking at that there was not professional development that was extensive within that area, and that there wasn't a district-wide professional development plan. Further, we wanted to make sure that there were instructional practices and make sure that there's consistency from building to building for the entire district. So steps that we took to improve it: we overhauled the curriculum to make sure it's aligned to the Common Core standards. We've developed a professional development plan, which has been laid out for the remainder of this year and is set up for next year to make sure we've identified the needs that we have. The instructional practices, we're now looking at, again, part of this comprehensive plan is, again, individualizing student needs and making sure that we're differentiating instruction within all classrooms. Other things that we found: there were concerns about some of the hard-to-fill positions as far as recruitment and retainment of staff, and there were also a significant number of federal and state violations. So we've now gone outside and started recruiting, gone to job fairs to make sure that we're trying to reach out to fill those hard-to-fill positions, and we're addressing the policies and practices as they come to make sure that we're in compliance. We found a lack of resources in the materials. Technology was lacking, it was outdated, and that we didn't have really a district system, that there weren't set expectations that carried between the 4 buildings. So we've purchased materials, we've purchased technology. That'll be something that we continue to address, and we're looking at the vertical articulation between the grade levels, making sure that we have a focus on what are the skills that are necessary to be successful in that grade level and the grade levels to follow. The biggest concern is that all students were not having their needs met by the current practices within the district. And so this is when we're talking about what is the overall effort. The overall effort is to make sure that all of these things are aligned, that our policies and our practices, our curriculum, our instructional practices, that all of these things are aligned to meet the needs of all students. And I really want to put an emphasis on all students. We have quite a number of students that do very well in this district. We have a number of students that go on to Ivy League schools. We have a number of students that do very well on the advanced placement. But it's not something that we're doing to serve all students. And so when we're talking about, you know, the strength of a district, it really has to do with serving all students. So we have a 3-year comparison looking at both, you know, the students that are economically disadvantaged and those that are not, to look at what occurs as far as achievement within those grades, within those groups. And so these are district-wide. So you can see that for 2010, for NJS, these are students that are not economically disadvantaged. And this is really a concern as we look over this 3-year trend of the students that are being underserved by the district. When you have a 40% gap between the students that are being underserved and the students that are performing well in the district, and this is district-wide, that's certainly an area for concern, especially since there's been some conversation about the fact that this is about economics, and this group of students is not based on low socioeconomics, and we still have a 40% gap.
How do you get, can I just ask a quick question? How do you get the entire district's NJS scores?
This is coming out of NJ Smart. So if we're looking at economically disadvantaged students, this is the breakdown again for 2010. And all the numbers are slightly different, you can still see that a 40% gap exists. And so we see that when we make comparisons by race, both in poverty and out of poverty, the gap persists. And this is really the area of concern, because when we talk about all children, it means all children, that regardless of those circumstances, that we're going to make sure that their needs are being met. This is a comparison chart that compares within the subgroups the economically disadvantaged and non-economically disadvantaged. And you can see if you're compensating and you're comparing it by racial group, you can see that that number is anywhere from 18% to 22%, roughly 23%. And so what we did is we made a comparison between the two groups within the racial subgroup. And so you can see that within this year, poverty accounted for almost a 20% difference in that gap, where the racial impact, you're looking at the two slides that we just went through, was 40% between our highest and our lowest. In 2011, this again is non-economically disadvantaged. And again, the gap persists. When we look in the economically disadvantaged subgroup, you can see that the gap still exists within the subgroup. Within that year, you can see that again, the gap for poverty, if you're looking at that right-hand column, you're looking at that poverty within those racial subgroups accounted anywhere from 14% to 26% based on racial subgroup. And so when we're talking about the tracking system, when we're talking about the services that we're providing to students, and when we're looking to see that obviously there's an impact that is associated with poverty, we also have a significant impact that's associated based on racial group. In 2012, it continues. You can see that this has been a persistent problem. This again, if you look at the bottom of the screen, is non-economically disadvantaged. When we look at economically disadvantaged, again, it's a smaller gap within this year, but still substantial. And when you look at 2012, within our, and I want to point out that the language that we're using is based on the fact that this comes from the State Department, and these are the categories that they use. And so This is how it is that they group the students that we're reporting out on. When you're looking at the black subgroup, you can see that in 2012, the black students living in poverty outperformed the black students not living in poverty. In 2013, we see that again. You're still looking at a significant gap between our subgroups. And again, this is the non-economically disadvantaged group. This is the economically disadvantaged group. Within that year, you can see that, again, the difference in poverty, you can see is a rate of anywhere from 22 to 28%. Overall, when we make the comparison about the impact on poverty versus not poverty, that gap is anywhere from 15 to 22%. The one that should stand out is when you're looking at African American, you can see that the gap is actually smaller. And so when we're looking at the fact that these students have been underserved over the last number of years, and you're looking at that 4-year average, you can see that it's not the economically disadvantaged and that the fact that this group is significantly higher. It's actually the fact that our non-economically disadvantaged are significantly lower than the other groups. So what is our mission? What is our responsibility? Our responsibility is to serve all students. It's to make sure that every student has the opportunities that we would want for our own child. And so when we're talking about what we do as a system, what we do as a district, this is focused on how do we make sure that every child, regardless of the area that they come in, regardless of their strengths and weaknesses when they come into school, that by the time that they leave us, that they have those opportunities. And so we have this pattern right now, and we see it again from Bartle, and we have focus status in the middle school, and we've had conversations at the board table about the fact that there are certain classes at the high school that are segregated, that they're based on placement, that there's a significant difference in the makeup of those classes. And when we're talking about, again, all students, this is what the responsibility of the district is. We have great students, we have great teachers, we have a lot of positives within the district, but the overall impact of the district is all students. And it is our responsibility and to make sure that we've addressed those needs. So we had our strategic planning and we set vision statements. When we're talking about vision statements, that all students will be global citizens, have the skills and knowledge to be successful in the ever-changing world. Okay, this is the priority. It's making sure that when they, upon graduation, that they have open doors, whether it be to college, whether it be to career. And so, what are the things that we're looking forward to for next year, for higher expectations, for meeting the needs of those students? Based on the shifts that have been made this year, we're going to have more students that are going to be provided gifted and talented services. We're expanding that programming to make sure that it meets not only the state mandate, but ensuring that more of those students are provided that service, the ones that qualify. We've talked a lot about the budget and the fact that we have more students that have needs and that we're going to be expanding programming to make sure that those needs are met. We have more professional development for staff. Not only the expanded calendar this year, but going into next year, the board approved for us to have additional days at the beginning of school to make sure that we start the year off right, that there's extensive planning, that there's time for teachers to be well prepared when they start within the classroom. There's more instructional feedback for staff. We're making changes to make sure that they're provided regular feedback. So it's not just on their evaluations that they're being told on ways that they can improve instruction for their students, but that they can have ongoing discussions with their building principals. More classroom materials and more texts. More instructional technology for the students and for staff. And the overall goal is making sure that we have more learning for students, that all students are better served. So from the strategic planning, we set out and we came up with the 5 areas: the budget, facilities, technology, professional development, and curriculum instruction. And the instructional goal that we set was that all students would be provided diverse, high-quality, engaging educational opportunities that exceed the state standards, that we're not teaching to a test, but that we're allowing students to grow to their full capability. In year 1, the goals that have been set is to align the curriculum and materials with the Common Core standards, expand project and scenario-based instruction, develop benchmark assessments that can be used universally across the subjects, and that all staff will meet to be able to plan on how to grade those benchmark assessments. In year 3, or by year 3, we're looking that we've increased the number of electives for students, that we've increased choice, that the Gifted and Talented program is fully implemented and differentiated throughout the curriculum, that we continue to expand the number of advanced placement classes and provide greater opportunities for students, that the curriculums are integrated, that we are making sure that the cross-curricular opportunities are fully fleshed out, and that we increase resources to differentiate instruction. And that has been something that, when we're talking about meeting the needs of individual kids, that has to be the driver. It has to be based on the individual. What are those individuals' needs, and how do we make sure that we're meeting their needs? By year 5, we'd like to have developed and implemented individual learning plans for all of the students. Be able to look at dual enrollment opportunities and career opportunities, internships out in the community. And that we'll continue to advance technology, and that technology is incorporated into the classrooms. Our goal for professional development is that all students will have enhanced educational outcomes due to staff using student-focused best practices. The year 1 goals are to offer staff development that promote the district initiatives and content knowledge. That the schools will have PLCs, school leadership teams, and that we're providing training on not only the benchmarks, but all of the things that we're implementing to make sure that it's done uniformly. And the purpose of this is to make sure that when we're collecting information on students, that it's consistent. One of the conversations we had about the benchmarking system with the teachers when we were discussing what to pick is the fact that it would be great for them to be able to have the kids tested and then be able to use that information and carry it out from year to year. The concern had been is that when we used a different system in every single grade level, you couldn't correlate the information from one year to next. This is actually eliminating that, and it's going to create a uniform system where we're going to be able to carry that out and have student information that should inform them on a year-to-year basis. For professional development, we're looking at making sure that there's a committee established to look at the district-wide professional development, that this meets the student needs and it meets the teacher needs. We're currently working on and will continue to work on the curriculum using the Understanding by Design model. By year 3, we want all staff to be trained and be able to use the information from the student performance, be able to use it within every grade level, and be able to use that information in the classroom daily. Another priority is, again, differentiation. We've talked about this, but these are things that take multiple years to implement. There's a learning curve, and it's important that people continue to refine their practices. We want to make sure that we're providing staff development to support intervention, and that we're also providing professional development on how it is that we work cross-curricularly. By year 5, we want this to be mastered. Make sure that classroom management and individualized instruction is mastered in every classroom. Our technology goal is that all students will be taught the skills that are necessary to be successful in an ever-changing 21st century environment. So This year, we did increase the budget from $35,000 to $150,000, and so we talked at the last meeting about that we'll be setting up committee meetings and allowing to bring groups together so that we can talk about how that money is going to be spent and what the long-term plan will be. This starts with really identifying what the deficiencies are, and we've talked a lot about that as far as not having a lot of computers or slow internet speed or that the infrastructure is weak. Buying new technology, using the Google apps that we currently have, using the Chromebooks to a greater extent, especially once the bandwidth increases, and making sure that we have clear communication on how that will be used and make sure that it's implemented within the classrooms to ensure that they have these skills. For facilities, all students will be provided a safe and positive learning environment. We've talked a little bit about the fact that we currently have increasing enrollment. From last month to this month, we've picked up another 7 students. And so, a continued conversation about the current facilities and what the need may be in the future is something that we're going to have to monitor over the next 5 years. This is something that has to be reviewed annually, but this is really looking at more of the long-term effect. So we're looking at, again, how it is that we utilize the space that we currently have. Is it used in the most efficient manner? Looking at our projected pupil enrollments as far as what our needs are going to be. Looking at the current facilities and seeing if there's a way to upgrade them to make them, to really improve the learning environment within it. All of these additional conversations in reference to facilities have to be tracked according to the increased growth. So when we're talking about a 5-year plan, this is something that has to be laid out over the next period of time. If in the next 2 years our enrollment increases to where we're 100% capacity, there needs to be a talk about how are we going to address that. Is it going to be trailers? Is it going to be a referendum? What's going to be the next step? And that'll be something that, again, we've picked up roughly 60 students over the last couple of years that have pushed us into the mid-90s. And so at that rate, we're looking at within 2 to 3 years, we'll be at capacity. Our budget goal is that all students' instructional and social emotional needs will be addressed through a fiscally responsible and efficient budget. And our plan, that's something that we review on a yearly basis. It'll be something that we've talked about as far as having the task force or having greater input and revising the calendar next year. So that's been something that we have done work on and will continue to work on as we move forward.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from the board?
First, thank you. I mean, that's very comprehensive.
Very good.
I think you laid out a lot of the issues that we've been talking about, and I like the discussion of a lot of the points in here in terms of the long-term planning. I guess I have a couple questions. I mean, first of all, I think it's sort of shocking, the data piece of it. So I mean, I thank you for bringing that to everybody's attention. It's definitely a conversation we've had a lot, but it's something that we've been asking for a while. And for years, we've been sitting at the table looking at the data that comes in every year from NJ Ask and this persistent gap, this persistent problem. And there hasn't been a sort of a meaningful look forward. So I appreciate the idea of bringing in systemic practices to do some serious change in this district. On page 17, you talked about PLCs and school leadership teams, and I was wondering if you could just explain, is that going to be in effect next year? And if so, at what grade levels, and how are you going to do that without reducing instructional time for staff?
So we are allocated 23 meetings after school and currently they're used for either faculty meetings or PLCs. A lot of the feedback that we received is that maybe the organization or what the priorities are weren't really laid out as well as they needed to be. And so the intention is that we're going to be able to look at next year's calendar, and so we have not only the professional development at the beginning of the year, but we have 10 hours of professional development that we can provide, and then be using those 23 meetings to try and give it to teachers to work on the things that are their priorities within their grade level bands, within their content areas. And so by having things that they're organized to be able to address, whether it be things that come up or things that they know this is just the time of year, and so you have a greater need to talk about benchmarking your final exams, but setting a calendar and a schedule to meet those needs.
So are there going to be any teachers then that have a PLC time built into their schedule, or is it all taken care of through the shifting of after-school meetings?
There's, if you're talking about common planning during the day, that has been something that we've talked about being a priority as far as scheduling. The PLC time is actually after school. It's one of these 23 meetings after school that'll be utilized for similar purpose, but more on a larger scale. Like I said, using it to discuss benchmarking it, using it to discuss when you have midterm exams where people can sit down and review questions or be able to have conversations in reference to what's the best answer, looking at the rubric to make sure that everyone's on the same page.
Okay, so common planning is something that we're looking at for next year also?
Common planning during the day is a priority.
And that would be at what grade levels?
Hopefully all of them. I mean, at the elementary school, we've already looked at a schedule that would provide common planning for all of the grade level teachers on a daily basis.
Wow.
At the secondary level, that's still a little bit up in the air, but it's certainly the priority as far as trying to schedule it.
Okay. On page 19, you mentioned in the 5-year goals, you're talking about mastering classroom management skills, individualizing instruction. You said sort of this is the culmination, right, the 5-year plan. I think part of this plan really, I think, has to have a component about how you retain staff, how you train them properly at the beginning of the year, how you talk about your recruitment efforts to bring in good talent, but I think as was discussed last board meeting, the idea of a new teacher mentoring program or some sort of pre-service that the brand new teachers to this district can have, I think that should be something that, if we can provide for that, or if there's some way that can be a priority that we talk about on the board, so that, the expectations are set once those teachers then come in to work with the rest of the faculty.
Absolutely. Actually, there's a requirement from the state that says you have to have a school improvement team. And that's supposed to be reviewing the evaluations, and it's supposed to be covering the mentoring within buildings as well. And so that is part of the larger plan, but it's specific to the buildings as well. And that's something that is a requirement moving forward.
When we look at hiring staff for September, is there a way that we can think about putting something like that in place?
Yeah, it has to be in place.
It has to be in place. Okay. Okay. Those are all my questions for now.
Tim, I first want to thank you for this presentation. I think, as Dan said, it's too bad Greg wasn't here, because Greg's been asking for something like this for a very, very long time. And you also presented something that I think does not surprise many members of this board and this community, that there is a gap in our school system. And this board, since I've been on it, have tried a number of different ways to remedy that, including recruiting of racial minorities into AP courses, funding through the Title I programs that we've had, but we've never been able to really hit the nail on the head on what's been effective. So now that we have identified these clear gaps and we've talked about them tonight, the board's responsibility is to budget. For next year's budget, we're obviously going to have to move money around to accommodate students here, and that means taking away from other students, maybe not, but assuming.
Well, I think this is less of a budget question and more about how it is that we service students. So we had a conversation here a couple months ago that was in reference to the criteria to get into honors classes or AP classes, and the fact that right there and the different expectations was something that was problematic. We talked about it as well at Bartle, about the tracking system and the impact that that has had.
Right.
You know, we also highlighted during a previous discussion of the student performance reports that the place where we allocated the most amount of time and resources, which is at the middle school, that we actually saw that that was the smallest gap across the board, both socioeconomic and within the
Right,
racial
but
subgroups.
we pay for that. We pay for the double English period. I'm thinking that we're going to need to purchase, fund, buy new teachers, create new classrooms at the lower levels, especially to accommodate these gaps. And I'm trying to figure out exactly what kind of programs we're talking about for next year and following.
Well, the district has already taken a lot of steps at the early grade levels, and it's just, I would argue that we have just maybe not maximized the potential of that.
Okay.
When you're talking about early childhood education, there's not too many districts in the state that have universal pre-K.
Yep.
There's not that many, you know, there's more that have full-day kindergarten, but to have both is a great opportunity for us to be able to use that time to make sure that students are coming on grade level. The other piece of this, though, is that when you look at the test scores at Bartle, we see that last year we were in the 80th percentile statewide as far as growth, which means in 4th and 5th grade they're making significant growth. And the question has to be asked then is, from pre-K to 3, why are we overall on a student performance sitting at the 47th percentile? And so that's something that I think we need to be able to address as far as the system and how we're providing and making sure that students are making adequate growth, and to ensure that when we get to that point, again, those numbers, you know, I think raise a question as far as if you're making such great growth in the 4th and 5th grade, why is the overall performance still where it is?
But, I'm sorry, I'm confused. You said the scores pre-K to 3rd, but the only testing grade in pre-K to 3rd is 3rd.
Correct.
So you're really just talking about the first year that 8-year-olds are exposed to 9 hours of standardized testing, and their scores that year compared to then their scores as 9, 10, and conceivably 11-year-olds when they're more developmentally advanced. They have now been through this procedure multiple times. I'm not quite sure.
Darcy, that's compared to the other students around the state in the same grade level, though. So if we're in the 80th percentile in 4th and 5th grade and we're exceeding what other growth is being made, okay, around the state, that I would still question why that is, because that's still, all those kids are 3rd graders.
Right, well, maybe other districts are. I mean, I think we would need a lot more information and data to understand the difference between our 3rd graders versus others, or, you know, how much test prep other districts are doing for 3rd graders versus our district, or...
I was just going to end my questions with just a statement. I feel, when I was in school, you felt this. You felt the racial and economic difference in the school system. And 10 years in retrospect, I think you can do a lot about it. And I think we have tremendous power as members of this board to really hone in on what can help these students prepare them for college and for a career. And I just really want to, I think you're the first superintendent to really address it in this way, while we've had other superintendents talk about it, and I think you're going to be able to pinpoint exactly where the need is.
Other thoughts?
I mean, I guess no one will be surprised, but I mean, I guess I disagree. I don't understand how putting the scores up, when we clearly know that there's a gap in our district. We've been talking about this for quite some time now. I fail to see how that changes what we already know and how it helps us target interventions towards students. I don't see how the racial breakdown helps us do that, unless that's how we plan to target interventions. I mean, to me, what you need to do is target interventions towards students who need assistance, regardless of whether they're socioeconomically advantaged or disadvantaged, what their race is, what their gender is. It's about helping students who need students, meeting students where they're at, and progressing them. And I personally, and I can only obviously speak for myself, feel a bit gobsmacked that I've been presented 5 years' worth of strategy when I feel like we didn't really go through a strategic planning process. And the timing of our strategic planning in this district was at a time that the district was in some significant turmoil. And I would like to feel that we were presenting a 5-year strategy to this district when we had buy-in from our staff and from all of our parents, and we did it as all of us moving forward.
What do you
So-
disagree with in the strategies that were outlined? What do you disagree
I
with?
haven't had enough of a chance to look at them to even understand them,
Okay,
Dan.
okay.
I was just presented something and a packet of information. I haven't looked at it. I haven't thought about it. If I'd felt more a part of the process throughout, then I could answer your question.
Understandable.
But just having been presented this, just because I see it up on a screen, doesn't mean I've digested it and
Sure.
I've fully understood it.
Of course.
So, again, if I'd had more opportunity to review it, or if we as a community and as a board had all worked together to present this vision, then I would feel prepared to answer that because I would have an intimate understanding of it. Right now, I just feel like something's been dropped in my lap for how my district is going to move forward for the next 5 years, and I personally am not comfortable with that.
Okay.
So I would agree with you, Darcy, that it's about the individual student. But when you're talking about the
Then we have to fund that
strategies,
student.
you do actually address, and you need to know whether
Yeah.
or not this is something that is due to poverty, or this is something that's, is something that has to do with race, because you're going to deal with those things differently.
Yeah.
It's definitely on an individual basis, but the strategy that you use is different. So, if you're looking at poverty as a whole.
I'm sorry, what strategy you use is different for different races? I don't understand.
There's
I
a
think,
cultural component.
Right.
right.
Okay,
This-
so then we would
this-
have to invite a lot of people to the table that so far I haven't seen or heard at the table.
You're saying you don't see what the difference is, and I'm telling you that there's a difference between how you're going to address those things. And so by identifying it, the whole purpose is then you can work to address it.
Okay, well
even
then I
if
guess
it is on an
I
individual
can
basis.
counter that I'm not seeing that specifically addressed enough in the strategic plan, and I would want to have known that those parents and those families were specifically consulted about their needs and their
Let me
their
take a
perspectives, too.
different perspective, because I'm not sure the point that you're arguing is the right one. I think that the perspective
can say that
maybe
you
is
like.
is really that it's very easy to attribute differences in performance to socioeconomics, right? And that's typically what's done. What we can see from this data, what you can glean is that really what the problem is that there aren't systemic practices that have been successful for all students. There has not been, right? We have tracking, which is a program that was put in place that actually held students back from achieving at a higher level. We have benchmarking and other things that Tim presented that don't allow the teachers to monitor the progress of students as they go through the system. And so without those kinds of things in place, it's very difficult to make progress for any student. And so I think the bigger picture of this isn't whether it's black students or whether it's Asian students or whether it's that.
Well, see, and that's why I don't understand why we need the slides.
It's that it's not socioeconomics alone. It's that it's something
think
else.
anyone ever would
it's
make that
something
argument.
else that
I don't
we're.
think anyone ever
excuse
made that
me,
argument.
It's something else that we're doing in this district that is holding students back. And that's I think the key. When we look at the kinds of programming and we look at the kinds of assessment, we looked at the kinds of training and the other things that were discussed. That's, I think, what we need to focus on. And,
But then
and
that's what I
think
would
that
like to
when I
see.
look at
That's
when
what I would like to
excuse me, when I look at the things that are posted in this, when I look at this presentation, there's not a single thing really in this list of things, when we look at the 1-year goals, we look at the 3-year goals, we look at the 5-year goals, that I would disagree with. I think it's the right step in the right direction. And when we get rid of tracking, when you get rid of the things that are barriers to students' performance, when you support teachers, when you give them the tools to make them successful, when you give them the training to be successful, when you put in place systems for teachers to use to help their students, I think that's what we're talking about right now. And I don't know that there's really any reason to sort of push back against that piece of it, right? Because that's really what we have as our goal on the board.
Yep.
I think the reason to push back against it slightly is because even when you're removing tracking, you have to know what you're replacing it with. And we're talking about having teachers fully understand how to differentiate instruction 5 years from now. And a group of us attended an education law center presentation where a superintendent in another district talked about how it was over a year or two time that
Yes,
they
it's a
detracked their
process.
district.
It's a process,
But
exactly.
the detracking took place over a year or two, not just an immediate detracking. Just detracking alone doesn't solve the problem. So to say we've detracked
Of course.
doesn't, without having other things in place to then replace it, doesn't necessarily make the change that you want to see. Personally, I would like to see that we've conducted a full evaluation of what we think the weaknesses are in our programs that have not helped students achieve, and have a full report on that, as opposed to just more parsed out data on
would you recommend that we
which-
put tracking back in for next year?
That's not what I'm saying, Dan. I'm saying that we present that the decisions that we do make are more thought out, and they're more, we have logical steps. We're removing tracking now because this is what we're replacing it with. This is what we already have in place just to support those students and to support those teachers. I understand that the teachers fully supported detracking, and I think that's fantastic, and I think it's great that we made steps towards that. Again, I wish we had had a more lengthy process in terms of how we switched from one mode to another.
But we kind of just had this conversation earlier. Okay.
Can I comment on that real quick? Because I think that the question is when you're talking about the rate of change, how much professional development is ever enough before you actually make the change? You're always going to have people that are going to be very good at it and fly ahead, and you're always going to have people that lag back. And it is a process. And the sooner you start that process, the better off those students are going to be. And the teachers are going to be. And when we're talking about meeting the needs of all kids, that's focused on the individualization. That's focused on differentiation. And all of those pieces are focused on how you train, how you work for the individual student, and how you identify those needs. And some of them are going to be cultural, and some of them are going to be poverty, and some are going to be both. And it's trying to address that in a systemic way to make sure that all students benefit from it.
And when we realized that there was a problem with the tracking we had, we should not subject those students who were at that grade level at that time to another year of what we thought was a bad practice. We decided to make that change to benefit those students at those times and not make them responsible for a bad decision a previous board and a previous administration made.
Coming back to the proficiency gap, I would just say my personal perspective on it. It's actually, as a member of the community, and I think many members of the community would be shocked to realize that there is such a gap among racial lines. I think one thing that Highland Park prides itself on is the inclusive nature of the community. And this isn't about identifying and blaming sections of the population. This is about acknowledging that there's an issue, and it's only through acknowledging that there's an issue that we can begin to identify it. Now, it may be around instruction. Obviously, it's about addressing the needs of the child, not particular groups. But there's obviously an issue here along those lines, and there's no problem that can be addressed unless you first acknowledge there's a problem. So I think it's good information. I think it's information we have to act on. I think, again, being new to this process, I think the community, if this were made available to the wider public and the seats were full here, I think the community would be just shocked that there's such a discrepancy exists.
After going through the high school, this does not shock me one bit. But being on the board for such a long time, it doesn't shock me one bit. But I believe this community, for the most part, says we're diverse, but does not act like we're diverse. We don't acknowledge within the school system that we have differences. We say we do, but we don't actually fund it. We don't actually put the programs behind it, and we don't have those interventions at the younger levels that we clearly need.
I agree with Adam about sort of the Highland Park's ethos, or what we say we are. I know certain members of Highland Park say that we value diversity. I just don't know that the non-white people in Highland Park would also say that they feel that diversity is valued.
In Irving and Bartle in this district, things are different. Once you get into the middle school and high school, things change in a negative way, in my opinion, where races and economics play a part in friendships of kids and the expectations of teachers. You know, one of the things when I was in high school was the expectations of teachers in certain classrooms versus others were different. That's not appropriate, and I think, Tim, you're trying to address that, and I think that that's something you're focusing on through PD.
Right, and again, that is a driver. When you're talking about tracking, you're talking about expectations. When you're talking about, what you expect from individual students, and, and really how do we respond with students that maybe aren't up on grade level? Is it, well, they came in, without that set of skills, or is it, what are we going to do to make sure they have the set of skills? And that's, again, why the personalization, the differentiation, that's really where our focus is, and that's the reason why, is that we need to look at them individually, and that the planning that has to occur has to be, this is the set of standards, this is the grade level, these are the skills and content that we want them to know. And for students that maybe aren't starting in the place that they should have according to grade level standards, what are we going to do to overcome that? Because that's how you close these kinds of gaps. That's how you make sure that all students are successful. And that's why, when we're talking about the systems, that's why it's so important to make sure that it addresses all students.
Any other thoughts? Yeah.
You're looking at the tip of your seat.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Claire, could we have the curriculum committee report?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, Tim, is there anything else in the superintendent's report?
That was it. Thank you.
Claire?
The curriculum, can you hear me?
Can you just move it closer, maybe? Yeah.
The curriculum committee did meet tonight. We discussed a number of items, one of which is the ongoing process of curriculum development, which is really exciting, seeing drafts of the project-based learning units that are being developed and are going to be being piloted starting in the early grades next week. I think that's one thing that really will probably help our achievement gap, having really, really strong curriculum that has very specific sets of activities and sort of writing processes. There's been a lot of professional development already and much more to come, a huge sheet of it, highlights of which are guided reading training, writer's workshop training, Google Apps training, guided reading, benchmark assessments, project-based learning training at the middle school and at the high school. So once these curriculum become, once they're approved and go into effect, I think people will be very happy to see them. I actually wrote to Michelle saying this curriculum that I took home and read, I said, this is really good. And I'm a pretty harsh critic on curriculum. I thought it was really, really, really a great unit. We got to look at the reviews from one of the more recent workshops, and they were really good. I mean, Michelle had told us they were good, but actually getting to see what the teachers had written was very exciting because they were very positive about this training, and they want the trainer to come back. And there were some big accomplishments in the music department, which I will let you know. Thanks to the teachers, Mr. Young, Mr. Coleman, Mr. Presti, and Ms. Fang. The Hershey Park Music Festival was recently, maybe a week ago or 2 weeks ago. And the orchestra won first place Superior. And they also, the Vivace Concert Orchestra won first place Superior. The Sinfonia won the best overall middle school junior high orchestra with the highest average score of 97. In band, the concert band, this is of the middle school, won first place excellent. The jazz band won first place excellent. And the concert choir won first place good. So luckily, we have these fine music teachers and a fine music program in Highland Park which we're not cutting, although some districts are cutting. So that was all really, really good news. So with that,
Nope. You're good.
oh, I'm not moving.
Yep.
I'm not moving anything.
Claire, can you talk a little bit about number 4, the Teen Center Summer Transitional Program, or can someone?
Yes, those are, let me just, if you look on the agenda, Darcy asked about numbers 4 and 5.
Well, 5 seems pretty self-explanatory. I was just wondering more about 4, because it sounds like it is, maybe it's not, and I'm wrong. It sounds like 5 is just to kind of introduce the teen center, but I was wondering about what the summer transitional program is.
That, I believe, unless somebody tells me, is to help students, I believe, transitioning to high school? Is that right?
Yes.
Yes, for students transitioning to high school.
Right. I'm just wondering if it's an open invitation to all upcoming.
I don't know, I'll find out.
I mean, we'd be interesting to know how kids are, what the outreach is,
Well, the
what
Teen
kind of
Center
attendance we
has
have.
a population that they serve.
I'm sorry?
The Teen Center has a population, from my understanding, that they serve.
As
Then
far
the
as
fu-
whether it's open to all students
Right,
or
the
whether
federal-
it's a selected group,
Yeah.
I don't actually know.
And that's set by
what
the
the
federal,
legislation-
that's set by the federal government grant standards.
Is it like a Title I thing, or?
Huh?
Is it a Title I?
I don't exactly know, I don't know where it's.
No, everything through the Teen Center runs through the grant that funds the Teen
Right.
Center.
Do you want me to find out?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to hear like how many kids it's open to, what the outreach is, how the outreach is conducted. I mean, because I think sometimes maybe we have programs like this that are fantastic that lots of kids could, benefit from, but maybe if our outreach isn't done, properly, or there isn't follow-up, or, whatever,
Okay,
that
I
we
will
don't
find out.
necessarily get the kids that we're trying to target.
Sure, that's
Or
a
target's
good-
such a bad word, but
I've never heard that complaint for the Teen Center.
I'm
Yeah.
not saying there's any complaints.
Yeah.
I'm just,
I know.
Any other discussion of the curriculum items? Catherine?
The Finance and Facilities Committee did meet tonight. On the ROD grants for the Bartle School windows. It's moving through the process. Still, it still has to go through one level of review. We may proceed with the notice to proceed to the contractor. That'll be happening very soon. Linda's reviewing the RFP specs for the custodial maintenance contract that we are working out with, along with the borough offices and the police department. We reviewed a few policies, non-mandatory policies that are new. Let's see, item number 10 on the agenda, we got a grant from HPEF.
Guys, excuse me, please. Excuse me. Sorry, if we could.
To help pay for the cost of the robotics team's trip to the National Robotics Meet. Item number 12, our tuition rates are going down in some categories as a result of larger student enrollments. This year, item number 13, we're increasing lunch prices again by 10 cents. We're still below the price level that the federal government requires us to charge, but we have to sort of creep up to that. Item number 16, Health Options Worldwide. This is offering a web-based and mobile app to employees to help them track their health and fitness. It's a purely optional program. And it is also free of charge to us. Item number 17, this is a program offered, providing a student who's coming back into the district with the services that they need, and savings from the tuition and transportation costs will be paying for this program. And I think that's it. Thanks.
I just want to say about number 16, and I want to thank Linda and Tim. This is the program that I spoke about, I think 1 or 2 meetings ago, from David from the Health Solutions. You guys got that done very quickly, and I appreciate that. He also has a number of opportunities that I would encourage you guys to meet with him, as he spoke about with me, of ways to self-insure and reduce reduce the health insurance costs throughout, not only the health insurance costs, but the health insurance, the liability, and a number of different types of insurance that we presently purchase, that he has worked with other school districts to lower the cost. Sometimes they take a lot of time, and Linda, I know you're very, very risk averse, and it's not always your favorite thing, but I would encourage you guys to sit with him and to really discuss where he can identify the needs and some of the solutions in terms of our costs for health, for all of our insurances. This program is very exciting. It's a supplemental that we're giving to all our teachers. As she said, this will help our teachers live a healthier lifestyle. That's something that we're trying to go throughout our whole strategic planning process for teachers and staff and students.
Are there any other questions on the finance items?
I did have a question on 12, the approval of tuition rates. So is this specifically for students who attend from outside the district, and
Yep.
and that's the only thing it impacts? Is that? And so is it? So it did go down. It looks like it went down significantly for most, but up dramatically for multiply disabled, and up dramatically for students with autism. Is that?
Transportation.
One of the big driving factors in your tuition rate is the number of students enrolled in that particular category. So, and also with special ed, you have escalating prices and probably not a great increase in the number of students being served. These programs are limited in the number of students that are able to be served in a given classroom because of their high level of need.
Sure.
So that will usually drive the cost of a lot of the special ed programs.
I mean, I guess I'm just wondering, do we have students in these programs that are going to be currently affected? I mean, I don't know if these are rates that parents pay, other districts pay. If
the tuition rates are used to guide people who are interested in coming to the district, either from other districts or individually. The rates are reviewed after the audit is completed, and the actual expenditures are calculated to come up with a final tuition rate, which then we go back and adjust up or down. So if the rates are high and the expenses came in lower, they would get a refund, after the audit was completed. So these are estimated based upon our estimated budget in those categories.
Right. No, I mean, I guess specifically my question is more, are there multiply disabled or autistic students that are currently paying tuition who are going to be negatively impacted by this dramatic of an increase in our tuition rates?
We have a couple of kids coming in from other school districts. And again, they understand that these are estimated tuition rates and that the final rates will be adjusted after the state reviews the audited figures.
Okay.
It's
So
also-
those are ones that are being paid for by other districts? Is it- not like...
I don't know that we have any individuals, but it's possible.
And it wouldn't necessarily hamper these students'
yeah,
ability
no.
to... I mean, I guess that's my concern, is like, are we hampering students who are
it's
coming here
usually-
currently by...
It's usually other school districts.
And the districts that are paying, the rates here are at half.
Sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
half of what
From
the
a
private
private
placements are.
setting, right.
Yeah, or a third or whatever.
These rates are also set by the state, that calculated.
Yeah, these are calculated in the state's budget program.
Oh, I'm sorry, so are these
This
rates
is
that
a-
are handed down to us from the
They're
state?
given
or-
to us through the state budget program.
It's a
Yeah.
formula.
Right.
Okay, yeah, I didn't know if it was one they said, okay.
No, we
perfect.
don't set it.
Okay.
We put our budget in and they give us the
They
rate.
spit out the
Yeah.
numbers. Great, thank you.
Talking about the preschool tuition rate, I would love for the board to relook at providing a full-day preschool program, being half free, half paid. We looked at this about probably 4 or 5 years ago. We had concerns about getting people to pay, but I was hoping that we could find something to structure this. There are many benefits to sending your kid to a full-day pre-K at Highland Park. It would be a certified staff. It would be 24-hour. It would be the full care that goes with the students. I think it could be a revenue generator for our district, and I'd love for us to look at it in greater detail and the possibilities of doing it.
If I may respond?
Yeah.
If you recall, we did implement this to anyone who was interested. I don't believe we had any people turned away. The program was run as an enterprise, and it just barely broke even.
But
there
that-
was no real revenue coming in. And there were complaints from people that they were being priced out.
Right.
if
But
they
wasn't
were
that issue
marginal.
wasn't that our issue of more of us not getting the payments in advance?
No,
Didn't
we had to send some dunning notices out for some people, but that wasn't the issue. The issue was there was no real profit margin because of the high cost of salaries and benefits.
But we did provide full-day pre-K.
We did offer it for
Right.
a full year to anyone who was interested, and we advertised it, we publicized it.
Something worth looking at, as long as it broke even at least.
Well,
It's full-day pre-K, I would
Well,
love for
these
us.
are,
I would
these
love
are
to.
two different things. I mean, what this is, it's two different issues. We're
Okay.
not really talking, I mean, we're not talking
We would set
about
our own rate for that.
in town, yeah. And I have a real problem with charging residents
Okay.
tuition for anything.
Even on a slide,
Especially if we're talking about equality and wanting to.
well, on a slide, sliding, I would,
And I think when we talked about it, for offering free full-day pre-K, your estimate was about $1 million or something like that.
Yeah.
It was very, very,
I mean, if it's free, you'll have
Expensive.
a lot of people coming, and then the costs will go up because you'll have to hire more teachers.
right. Which would be ideal, but la la land. Any other discussion on the finance items? Ann?
The Personnel Committee did meet this evening and discussed a number of personnel items. We also talked about the possibility of adding a couple of Schedule B positions. We did not come to any conclusion about that. And with that, and I'm not moving anything, that's all.
Okay, is there any discussion of the items on the personnel agenda?
Yeah, I had a question. What is teacher leader? It's on the number 9, job descriptions?
We actually didn't discuss that. That needs to be struck for this meeting.
What?
That needs to be struck for this meeting.
The job
Teacher lead-
descriptions are being struck?
We didn't discuss that.
We didn't discuss
Discuss
it.
it in the personnel.
Right. And this is something that we were talking about, this is a peer-to-peer relationship where they would be coaching and mentoring, and something that we would be looking at within the district to provide additional support. With all of the changes that have occurred, even though we've had an increase in, official observations, the amount of regular feedback is really critical as far as improving practice. And so the idea is that we would be looking at a position potentially at the elementary and a position at the secondary that would be coaching, mentoring, and providing that feedback to staff on instructional practices, helping with curriculum as far as their needs and the assessments and being able to lead not only that, but what we had referenced before as far as the school improvement panels, which is that's one of the central duties.
But so this is not on the agenda tonight?
No.
Number 9, okay.
I'm sorry, did we table it just because we didn't get to discuss it in committee, or for
Yes.
some? Yeah.
It was something that we had written up a job description for, but I wasn't ready to present it.
But, I'm sorry, so I'm clear, we're tabling all of number 9 or just teacher leader?
We're tabling, there is nothing to move or to discuss for 2450. So that's what's being tabled.
So it's just 24, I'm just trying to clarify,
Yeah.
just 2450, we're still moving 2113 through
you're not
2442?
striking all items.
No,
No, or the,
We're not going to move the job descriptions tonight.
the job,
All of these.
no, I'm talking about 2450.
she's just talking about 2450.
Okay.
That we're not moving, but the other numbers are being moved? The other job descriptions on the agenda are being moved?
Well, we'll see when we get there. Yeah.
Well, but that would
See when we get
infect
there.
people's comments possibly. I mean, if anybody
If
wanted to
we're
comment
gonna
on any of
preempt
those,
it.
we should know whether we're moving
Sure.
them or not.
Well, if we're going to talk about this, my comfort level with this would actually be to just, to table number 9 completely.
I
Just so that
agree.
we could have one more meeting to review the job descriptions before we approve them.
I second that.
And then, we don't even have to bother with 2450, I guess.
Right.
Right.
But board members have the job descriptions in their packets. I read over most of them.
Yeah. Is there any
Right,
other?
they're in the other folder,
Right.
though, I think, right.
Everybody has sort of seen them or taking a look at them.
Personally, I'd like a lot more time to mull the whole idea over of a lot of these.
Okay. Any other discussion on the personnel? Adam?
Yes, the policy committee did not meet tonight. We have 3 for second reading. The video surveillance has the changes that we spoke about at the last meeting, and so same with the school level planning policy.
Okay. Any discussion on those? Okay. Highland Park Board of Education welcomes public participation and has reserved this time for your comments. As per policy 167, I'd like to make a motion to limit public comment to 3 minutes for each comment.
Second.
Linda?
Ms. Aversa?
Yes.
Ms. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Bull?
Yes.
Ms. Simarusti?
No.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Ms. Sherber?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Wharton?
No.
Yes.
As you come up to make public comment, please sign in the ledger and state your name and address as well for us. Thank you.
Judy Petrobono, 40 South 4th Avenue. I'm here as sort of a follow-up. I came a couple of months ago, or last month actually, to talk about the opt-out policy, or the lack of a policy. But I just had some issues that came up that I wanted just a little clarification. When I was at the meeting last time, the superintendent said that we don't have a policy. My son comes to class. He'll be asked to take the test, which I understood. This is the biology test that's starting tomorrow. I think testing hours are for about 3 hours. Since there's no opt-out policy, if he goes to school, he'll be sitting in the classroom for 3 hours. Since I'm not comfortable with that, I've decided to keep him home for just the test hours and send him back. I did email you, Mr. Soto. I guess you didn't have a chance to email me back. So I'm just here to talk a little bit about that. I spoke to his guidance counselor, and she told me that Ms. Callis said that if he doesn't come those first 2 days, then he will also have to, if he shows up Thursday and Friday, he would have to sit for the tests on the makeup days. What concerns me about that is that if he stays home or he comes in for those days, he'll then be missing instructional time. So he'll be missing his English class, his health class, art class, and I don't really understand that part. Like, I was hoping for some sort of compromise. I know you don't agree with my position. I don't really, up to this point, really agree with the fact that we don't have a policy, but we can agree to disagree. But missing instructional time, that's where I'm having a little problem. So if you could explain that to me and what your positions are.
Again, I don't think this is my personal opinion. You're talking about that there's a state policy that says that they have to sit for the test. And so if they're present, then they have to sit for the test. And so, it's not my intention to try and take away your right to opt out. And as far as the standardized testing in general, the position that I take on any of this testing is it's only as useful as, it is applicable. And so, when we're talking about how this is essentially used, there's certainly a limitation. But at the same time, the fact that the statute that we were sent by the state says that all students will sit for statewide testing, that's what we're following.
There have been other districts that on the makeup days have allowed the students to come in, say that refusing the test, been marked that, and been able to go back to class. That is not something the board members here are interested in doing. Any wiggle room here? I'm just asking for my son to be able to go to classes when classes resume. I understand you have an obligation to administer the test. I get that. But he's not going to be taking the test. If he sits there for 3 hours versus sits there for 5 minutes on Thursday and Friday, I'm not getting the difference. If he says he's refusing the test, he's not going to be taking the test. So, you lost 3 hours of instructional time, which is sort of against the mission that you just explained in your presentation, meeting the instructional and emotional needs of the child, and then he has to, miss class and get behind. And
I don't disagree with you at all. And when you're looking at that policy set by the state, the intention is that this is a make-up opportunity for students that have missed it, so that they have the largest number of students and the largest sample size. Again, this is something that I would say belongs at the building level. Having a district level policy, when you're talking about the ways that it's implemented differently depending on what the regulations of the testing, that's something that I would really point you back to what the testing manual says and what they're able to do.
I've been to the building level, but haven't gotten a response from the building. From the teacher. The teachers and support staff have directed me to Mr. Soto. Mr. Soto didn't answer my email that I sent Thursday night.
I want to apologize for not answering your email. I did have a conversation with another family regarding this particular issue. And if you would forward your telephone number, by tomorrow I will have an answer.
Okay,
I certainly
appreciate that.
empathize with your position, and we want to rectify this as soon as possible.
Okay, thank you.
I know this is important for you.
Thank you, Mr. Soto.
Thank you.
I do just want to point out that other districts are making accommodations, and I'm going to read this out specifically from Montclair, which informed their parents that if the principal is notified before or on the day, this is for NJ Ask, testing by a parent via email, formal letter, phone call, and/or face-to-face conversation that his or her child will not be participating in the NJ Ask testing, this is considered a premeditated parental refusal, and the following action should be taken. On the day of testing, confirm with student if they will not be participating in testing. If not, alternate plans for students should be made, such as independent reading, schoolwork in a non-testing room with teacher substitute. These arrangements are to be building-based and should be planned for prior to testing dates. I fail to see why we can't do something similar. If other districts in the state...
We forwarded to that. We took that.
If other districts in the state are doing this without negative consequences to their district, negative consequences to their teachers, negative consequences...
You don't know what the consequence is going to be yet. I took that email, I forwarded it back to the state, and their response was all students test.
They said the language wasn't, we forwarded it to you, and the language was not, there in that memo it said it came from the state or somebody at the state. When we forwarded it to the state, they said that this is nothing that they said or advocated for.
Okay.
Kimberly Bevilacqua-Crane, speaking as president of HPEA. I'd like to talk a little bit about the student and staff support person at Bartle and the recommendation to eliminate that position. Just a little history on this position. This was a position that was developed between the union and the administration and the Board of Education as a cost-saving measure and a way that we could manage discipline and our lunches and our recesses in Bartle School. We're extremely concerned as to how this is going to go next year with a brand new principal in the building and a new evaluation system that requires administration to evaluate 3 times. It's an enormous stress on administration to have to be in classrooms that much. And the elimination of this position is going to put us into a very new realm with discipline. So we'd like to express our concerns about that and request a plan as to how these issues are now going to be dealt with.
Kim, can I ask for clarification? The staff and student support teacher position doesn't do evaluations.
They do not do evaluations, no. So, but what they do is take care of all of the discipline in the school. We have incident reports that the teachers hand in. They track them, they file them, they keep track of if a student has more than 5. We have a whole system in place for keeping track of repeat offenses, so we can look at the educational piece of that and get them to guidance so we can get the students some help if they're struggling with behavior. And it's worked out very well, and this person works very hard to make the school run smoothly for everyone, including the students that are struggling with behavior. So we're quite concerned about the elimination of that, and maybe Mr. Capone can help us out.
How many classes is she teaching currently?
I'm not sure. I don't know her schedule. I don't remember.
Yeah, that can't.
Well, it's the position, this is about the position. The position is currently teaching 6 gym classes.
But that's in another position that she holds.
She does. It's a position that,
No, it's not. This is a single position.
I'm not sure.
This is Schedule B.
It's not Schedule B.
It's not Schedule B. It's a position.
Right, it's a position.
Oh, I thought it was Schedule B.
No, so our concern is, though, where is this moving in the future? Who's going to take care of discipline?
Those are administrative duties.
Okay.
The administrator will deal with them.
So what we plan on doing is tracking the incident reports that we have next year, and we'll keep tabs and we will report as far as to how discipline is going and whether we have an increase in incident reports and behavior.
Kim, I'm sorry, can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
So are you saying that as a part of that position, that the person in that position is actually physically present in lunch and recess?
Yes,
So
and she orchestrates the paras. She's absolutely not in a supervisory role. She does not supervise in any way. She does not do evaluations. She's not, she's a peer. I mean, she's a member. She's an HBA member. But she does absolutely facilitate. She does scheduling. She assists the principal with the daily routines.
But I'm
and
sorry.
yes, she is physically present in lunch and on recess.
So she's
orchestrates
physically
that.
present in
Yes.
lunch, in recess,
Yep.
with the students?
Yes.
So then if we're saying that the principal is now going to be responsible for that, are we saying that the principal is now going to be in lunch and recess?
No. This is going to be something that the schedule's going to be worked out. We have a new
duty.
principal coming in, and they'll decide how they allocate staff.
It's a duty.
Okay.
And just for my clarity, I'm kind of confused on the wording. This was not a position that was voted on during the budget process, or it was. It's just that the terminology is different here than I would have expected during the budget. Okay.
This is, I believe, what was part of the inefficiencies.
Inefficiencies.
Correct. No, this was part of the reorganization. We had a lot of conversation about, again, pseudo-administrative positions being done by people under the HPA contract. And it was trying to make sure that we had administrators doing administrative work.
I do recall the administrative roles, but thank you.
There was one other comment. I wanted to comment on the teacher leader positions. We wanted to make sure that when the teacher leader job description does come out, that there is, this is also along the same vein, that there is absolutely no evaluatory, in the same line, no evaluatory component to that. Yep. Just as this position that we're speaking of now, the student and staff support person did not evaluate, we would absolutely not be accepting of any of our members evaluating each other. So the teacher leader positions, while we're aware of these in other districts, and it can be a very helpful position, we would absolutely not be in support of any of our colleagues evaluating each other. I think we spoke about this at the last board meeting. Skip panels are fine as long as you're looking at aggregate data. as long as you're looking at data that is not specific to the person. But when it becomes personal or you're looking at specific evaluations, that's not something that we're on board with.
You and I have had this conversation. I've assured you that it's not there's no evaluation.
And we agree as well.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kim.
And are the job descriptions, when we post everything online, like with the budget stuff and whatever else, will the job descriptions be posted as well and made public? Because I looked for them, I didn't see them. I might have missed them because a lot, which kind of brings me to the point of maybe there's, we've always had things get separated out on the website just as, minutes and agendas or something like that. I think maybe we now that we're doing this kind of like huge document dump, which I think is fantastic that we're doing it, but it makes it like a little more confusing to kind of, or harder to like scroll through everything and pick out what's the agenda, pick out what's, maybe we need to look at some other way of reorganizing that stuff now on the website to make that stuff a little bit more accessible. But so if we're talking about tabling the job descriptions for this meeting and putting them to the next meeting, I guess I just want to make sure that that stuff is being put out publicly.
Don't we have to approve them before we put them out?
Oh, so it has to be okay. So we have to approve them before they're put out?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
We can't have just job descriptions that aren't approved and floating out there thinking, somebody could think that they're the approved one.
You can't put it out like as a draft form or, because, documents are put out all the time with great big draft.
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know.
Can we find out the answer to that?
No. No, we can't.
Well, they'll be on the agenda in the next meeting, and we'll approve them, and they'll go on the website.
But the titles will be, but the job descriptions themselves won't, is what I'm...
Job description.
Not until after we approve them.
Right.
No, we did, if the job descriptions are made public before we approve them,
She wants the full
is what I'm
the full
asking.
document.
If,
Oh, no.
And I said we don't do that before we approve it.
okay.
Ann?
Not yet.
Sorry.
I'm happy to defer, obviously. Sorry. Ann Gowan, South 2nd Avenue. I have to say, I admit I didn't follow all of the, I can't write South. I didn't follow all the discussion of who's Schedule B and who's an administrator and all that, but I just wanted to echo the comments about whatever she's called, the student support person. I mean, we were talking about Mrs. Schmoen. I believe it's okay for me to say that. Our experience in Bartle for 2 years is that position just seems totally critical. I mean, she's in the lunchroom, you heard, she's in the lunchroom, she's in the playground. I know this is not about the person, but as a person in this position, she has a very good reputation among the parents for really knowing the different kids and really kind of keeping an eye on kids who are bully magnets and keeping an eye on kids who might be more predisposed potentially to behave in a bullying manner. So it's concerning to the parents, to a number of parents, that position is being eliminated. And my understanding from talking with teachers is that she frees up Mrs. Frazier to be able to do observations. So I just can't imagine a principal being able to do all that on her own, but so that's my input for the parents. I also, just quickly, it was really shocking to see those race numbers up there and to see that there is a gap that's not explained by socioeconomic factors but is due to race. And it's a potentially offensive thing to hear. Obviously we don't think there's anything ingrained that's causing that. So I'm wondering, is the district planning something sort of specific to make sure that there is not racial bias going on in our classrooms? I hear like we're doing a lot of, the plan sounds great. It sounds very general. But everything I heard sounded fantastic. I don't know what the details are. But are we gonna do diversity training for the students? Are we going to try what Adam mentioned, recruiting minority students into AP classes? I hear the high school is very segregated. What are we going to do to specifically attack? I assume that we put those numbers up there for a reason, and that we're going to try to really do something to deal specifically with this racial divide. And I'm wondering what it is, other than just sort of making the whole school system better.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, I would say part of it is culture and climate, and part of it is the expectations. Those are really the two places to start initially. As far as general practices, and when again, I would point you back to where we're talking about differentiation, you're talking about individualing practice, making sure that you're doing it and doing it in a systemic way within the classroom is again another way to avoid that, where you're not just let's say in a practice grouping students and then working with one group as opposed to the other, but that we're making sure we're addressing all of those students' needs. And so, I would say that those are the first two components. Talking about, how you deal with, students that have additional needs, whether it's due to poverty or whether, again, it's a bias. I think that's more individualized as far as,
Sure.
looking at practice. I don't, we're not looking at, a training to come in and say, this is how you deal with, different students of a different race. It's more focused on those individuals as a whole, and then trying to say, do we have patterns, do we have trends?
So we have a pattern of apparently, I guess, underserving African American students, but we're not going to do sort of a diversity type training. I mean, it seems to me that something specific to race is going on. I mean, I realize having a trainer come in and say, hey, be nice to all races sounds ridiculous.
I'm not making an accusation of racism, and that's not what.
I'm not saying you are. I'm wondering if there's something going on that is.
But if we use the example of tracking, if you're tracking a group of students into the lower tracks,
right.
that means you have lower expectations. It means that they're not being pushed up to the same level.
Yep.
And if we're not addressing that, and that's then carried on year after year after year, where you have lower expectations, that actually could lead to what you're talking about as far as tracking students starting in 3rd grade out of advanced placement classes, out of honors classes. There's a dynamic there that really starts with those expectations and how you're dealing with that. So changing that dynamic, I think, is the first critical part. And then again, with any social science, there's a little bit of there's gray. You're trying to follow those trends. That's all this is. This shows a trend and it shows an area of need that we can focus on, and we want to look to see what kind of practices could be the root causes of that. We've identified some already, and we'll continue to look at it as we move through. And the goal is that over the upcoming years that we see that these numbers are diverging, that we're making sure that the gaps are closing, and that we're raising the achievement of all of those students.
I mean, certainly detracking, seems in the literature to be a great idea. I know people disagree, but I'm all in favor of that. I just wonder if maybe we shouldn't be doing some sort of educational process for maybe to encourage students to talk to each other.
Yep.
We give it a tracking, and then we have more of this, Rethink HP type seminar in the high school. We really make an active effort to, I don't know how you do this, but to get people together.
I think Ms. Gowan's question is spot on, and it was kind of what I was trying to allude to earlier, was I think that this board is obviously, or should at least, put some money from our budget, not maybe in this year's because we've already just struck it, but we're going to have to talk about programs, we're going to have to talk about after-school initiatives, we're going to have to talk about interventions during the school day, to not identified on race, but on need. And I think that that's going to require an investment, now that we've identified the needs from this board, from this community, to put money behind those types of programs that Ms. Gowan's speaking about, and that the administration and others will come up with along the way.
And
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I think so too. I'm sorry. I'll run away in a second. I mean, that sounds right to me. I question decisions like, riffing the Title I coordinators. I mean, I admit until a couple weeks ago, I had no idea what they did, but, then I started to read about it, and it seems like one thing that they were supposed to be doing anyway, and what I remember Ms. Estes got up here at the last meeting and talked about how they'd done it very effectively with her child, was addressing students who were in need. So I'm concerned about the decisions to do that. And I will leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Just a quick comment. I think you're absolutely right, and I think our approach has to be multifaceted. I think we have to be incredibly humble in the kind of help and the resources we ask for. It has to be the focus of many board meetings to come. It has to be a prime issue for the administration and for the community. But we do have to be humble, and something as basic as diversity training probably is somewhere we have to start. But we have to look at every opportunity to address this. But yeah, you were at the meeting where Councilwoman Foster Dublin said that this is an issue she's been aware of for 10 years. So that we're not here as a community talking about this 10 years from now, we have to be incredibly humble and look at every opportunity. So I totally agree with you.
Well, and I agree with you completely, Ashley. And to that point, I think it also means we have to take a much more in-depth look at data.
I completely agree.
And to put this all on I feel like we're continually putting this on the back of detracking. And I personally don't know, in my own experience, when we started tracking. Does anybody know when that practice was started?
I was tracked in this district.
Well, yeah, you were tracked, but then we actually abandoned the practice,
Right.
and then
Then I brought it back.
reestablished it during the previous administration.
Right.
So
I mean,
it's only been about 5 years since we sort of reestablished tracking.
Well, we established it in a different way, sorry.
But to my point is that if we've only been tracking, say, in Bartle, the tracking that we just dismantled for 5 years, I would want to look at the data from the 5 years prior to that tracking, specifically for the Bartle students, and then the 5 years during that tracking, and see if that is possibly the factor. Did scores go down during the time that we tracked? Did they go up during the time that we tracked? We just don't know. So I'm thinking that the problem is much more multifaceted than just saying we've gotten rid of tracking and now we're going to individualize instruction and that's going to solve it. I think we need to take a much more broad brush approach.
Absolutely. I view this as the beginning of the conversation. I mean, at least for me, it's the beginning of the conversation, and I'm sure everyone else. I know there's been undertones and there's been discussions, but getting it out in public. So yeah, I completely agree with you.
Melissa?
Hi, my name is Melissa Newman. I'm at 215 Montgomery Street. A while back, I had looked at the high school catalog and the different levels that exist in the high school, and the math really struck me as that it really didn't seem like there was any path to go from one track for another. Let me give an example of how things were done in my own high school. In my own high school, for Algebra 1, there was 2 choices. One choice was that you took Algebra 1 over 2 years, and the other choice was you took Algebra 1 over 1 year, depending on how well the math skills were of the student. But whether you took Algebra 1 over 2 years or Algebra 1 over 1 year, you still were then able to go and take geometry. Although there was also the option for the kids that took Algebra 1 over 2 years to then take business math to satisfy a math requirement. But when I looked at the Highland Park's catalog, it said Algebra 1 College Prep and Algebra 1 Honors, but they were still only both 1 year. And when I was asking the principal at the time, how does a person go from the Algebra 1 College Prep to, say, the Geometry Honors or go on to the higher level track or something, his response was basically, that's the way all New Jersey schools do it. And that doesn't really make sense, because we really should be having plans to say, okay, if someone needs to start out on college prep at freshman level, what can they do to then try and get themselves up to the honors level? Maybe it might include saying, okay, you need to take this class during your freshman year, but you also need to take this summer school class so that you can accomplish what needs to be accomplished in order to then get onto the higher level track in your sophomore year. And it's also with the middle school as well. It's like there's some kids that take algebra starting in 7th grade, and then there's other kids that take algebra starting in 8th grade, and I'm not even sure if there's ones that don't take algebra at all. But it's like there's no communications to the parents that says, this is how we're setting up the math classes, this is what the requirements are, this is some paths, like for example, if your child really wants to take algebra, what they need to do and what they need to accomplish in order to be able to do that. So I think it's also communications with the parents and the students themselves to say what they need to do in order to help themselves.
So I agree completely. As a math supervisor, I can tell you in 10 schools, you'll see it 10 different ways. One of the issues is that Algebra 2 is a graduation requirement, and now it's a PARCC-tested subject. So if you offered Algebra 1 over 2 years, starting in 9th grade, if a student fails a course, then you're talking about a potential issue there with the student meeting the requirements.
If the student is failing the class, then there's more problems than just failing the class.
There are a lot of different ways to do this.
But if they have to take Algebra 2 by the end of 12th grade, you're talking Algebra 1 over 2 years, geometry, and then Algebra 2 their senior year, which then satisfies that requirement by the time they're graduating taking Algebra 2. But they still have to master the skills of Algebra 1 before they can go to Algebra 2.
Correct. If a student passed the classes in that sequence, that's absolutely right. And like I said, there are a lot of different ways. Many schools mandate Algebra 1 in 8th grade. And so, there's really a spectrum. I think to the second point, though, which is probably the more appropriate point, I guess, in terms of what the administration can do to notify parents, there was discussion about the recommendation criteria. We had this discussion in the curriculum committee. That right now the teachers are working with recommendation criteria that is somewhat unclear. And so in terms of, that question that you asked, how does a student get from college prep algebra 1 into honors geometry, right? That should be a pathway. There's no question that should be a pathway that students should have the option to achieve. So the question is, what objective criteria does that student have to meet in order to get there, and how is that communicated to the parents? And that's critical. And that's something that, from our conversation with Michelle Callis today, that's something that's going to be developed for many subject areas. And that kind of criteria would be published on the website so that parents would have the foreknowledge when they go into the course. Here's where my child has to achieve in order to be moved up into the same level, let's say. And here's where my child would have to achieve if he or she it could be accelerated into a different level. So that's absolutely something that, with the redesign of the curriculum that's happening right now, this has been something that the administration has noticed as a problem, and so it's definitely something they're looking to address.
I also have a question of, I'm not kind of clear about how summer school works in this district. Like, there's only certain school students or no students that do summer school?
We don't have a summer school program.
Oh, there's no summer school at all? Okay.
We don't run.
We don't run a summer school program. Summer school is at the child's expense.
Wait, can you repeat that, please?
We don't run a summer school program in this district. It was a budget cut probably 7 years ago.
Thank you, Melissa.
We accept credit though from other programs. We accept credits from other programs.
Denise Mayfryer, 314 Wayne Street. I wanted to echo Ann Gowan's comment about Barb Shimon. We are having a new principal come in, and I know that you keep saying it's positions, not bodies, but sometimes it really is a body. There's a new principal coming in. There's not going to be any kind of continuity in Bartle. My kids aren't in Bartle anymore, but let me tell you about my son's experience at Bartle. Ms. Shimon was absolutely instrumental in helping my son adjust from the charter school into Bartle School. He had a lot of disciplinary problems, and she worked with him one-on-one a lot. She called us to help my partner and I work with our son and develop plans for him and develop strategies for him. She was also instrumental in dealing with him when he was bullied. She helped him get through that. She was there all the time for him to go to when he was in a lunch period, for him to go to in a gym class, for him to just go to. She's kind of like a one-woman teen center for the Bartle School kids. So, really, sometimes it is the person. She's a really good, caring person who cared about my son, a student person. He was excellent for her. And, it can't be just all about the money, and it can't just be all about what the administration wants. So you're going to have a new administrator in there who's a principal, which is fine, who doesn't know the history of the school, which I don't know, I question that. But you're not going to have a Ms. Shimon there dealing with the kids. And I understand she does more than just deal with the kids. So I ask you to reconsider this, you, the Board of Education, who are the employer of the administration. Thank you about that. My question, actually, that wasn't a question, that was a comment. My question is about the gifted and talented. So this is part of this presentation, and if I'm correct, I saw that gifted and talented is going to be implemented from K to 12. We eliminated one gifted and talented teacher, so I'm wondering how we're going to do that. That's part A. Part B is, how is this going to work? Are you going to remove children from classrooms, or is it going to be implemented in the classrooms? Who will be selected? I'm not saying I've got gifted and talented kids. I just am concerned that this is going to add more to this differentiation that Mr. Capone likes to talk about, but in a negative way. So you're going to have, rich kids get pulled out, or whatever, smart kids pulled out, or whoever pulled out. And, I don't know. I really have a lot of problems with that. And for the racism stuff, this town needs to have, and this school district needs to have a very, very frank discussion about racism. I think Ms. Richardson got up here a couple of months ago and talked about the impact on her child, who is an African American or biracial child, at somebody handing this child a voucher for a lunch or some comment about that, and I thought that was appalling. I think we cannot bury this. As Mr. Wharton said, we don't want to be doing this in 10 years. I suggest we have workshops for the students, for the teachers, for the town. We need to undo the racism. There are workshops around that. I've taken them. We really need to talk very frankly about race.
Yep.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Denise.
My name is Michelle McFadden Tinacola. I live at South 2nd Avenue, and I have 3 children in the district that opted out. They were brave, and my eldest was the first to go. He's in 7th grade. He was diagnosed with anxiety and depression in the 5th grade, and that was related to academic pressure. And it most significantly was testing. So for years, I've been encouraging my husband to get behind me in my strong opinions about the test and to opt our children out. And his attitude was that we should allow them to take the test because it would help them in their SAT prep, and the test was important to get through. Nobody likes it. You just have to kind of soldier through. And I'm an educator. I was a former educator. And I understand what the test is about. The test is about making money for the testing companies. And if you don't understand that, I'd be happy to speak with you about that. It's really difficult for me to think that these things are still happening, that we're still pushing for these tests, and that we're spending money in preparation for these tests, and that we're making decisions on groups of people based on these tests. I don't think that they're valid, except to point out who has been prepped for them. My husband did an Oprah request, and he got some emails back. Our administration is blaming our teachers and the principals of the schools for the policy of sit and stare. And there is proof in this email. 2 emails. Mr. Lassiter sent an email to Mr. Capone on April 25th at 9:13 a.m. asking for advice on how to respond to parents who were interested in opting out, me and my husband being one of them, but not the only ones. So this was, months before the test began. I believe March was the first time that we contacted this administration. And we got no response. So Mr. Lassiter, trying to get information, went to Mr. Capone via email, asked for guidance on this matter. He received an answer back the following day at 4:55 p.m. He sends out an email to his staff quoting, I believe, what he got in response, because his initial email was that he didn't have any response. And so he emailed Mr. Capone. There was an email, but it was not given to us in the Oprah request. There was some, well, I don't know that there was an email. There was a response, I'll say that. There was a response. Because later that day at 4:55 on the 26th, he contacted his staff and told them, quote, "The state of New Jersey does not have an opt-out policy. If a student comes to testing and boycotts taking the test, proceed as follows. If they are not disruptive and they sit there quietly, no reading or sleeping, they remain in the room. They are expected to open each section of the test." Now, why you would be expected
Michelle,
to
please
open
just
each
wrap
section
your,
of the test?
if you could wrap your comments up, please. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure that that's actually how that works. If you'd like to continue her comments,
Well-
you certainly might.
They're my comments. I don't think she can continue them.
Okay, then you'll have to wrap up then, please.
You'll need to remove me from the podium if you intend to get me out of here in 3 minutes. You made my children sit for hours. You made my children sit for hours and do nothing. You refused them an education. They sat for hours because they were instructed by their parents and they chose to opt out of this test that they know is absolutely pointless and invaluable to their lives. They know that. They're 12, 10, and 8, and they know that. If they know that, everyone in this room knows that on some level, and I expect this town to validate that.
Thank you.
If a student comes to the
Michelle.
testing room,
Michelle,
proceed as
please.
follows. If they are not disruptive and they sit there quietly, no reading or sleeping, they may remain in the room. They are expected to open each section of the test as you proceed through it. If he or she is belligerent or causing a disruption, contact Mike, and the student will be placed in another location. I believe Mike is Mike LoBianco in that email. That section of the test will be voided. Refusing to open the test sections constitutes belligerence, and administration should be notified. Is that the kind of district that represents, that presentation? I don't believe a word of that presentation or anything positive about it because of these things that I see in
Michelle,
my hand.
If you opened the emails, then you have the email that I sent, which is the administrative code.
Funny enough, that wasn't
that's what
given
you
to my
have.
husband. Funny enough, that was missing. I need you all to hear what happened to my family because it's going to happen to anyone else that deals with this administration. They're not being honest. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Lorena Edenbaum, 201 South 2nd Avenue. I just have a very specific question for curriculum about the presentation that you made. You said that you're going to be doing project-based learning and that you're going to implement that in lower levels. My question is that for all the classes or which grade is that towards, direct towards?
I don't know the exact answer, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Lorena, actually, if you could just ask the question again so that...
I didn't hear the question.
How are they going to implement the project-based learning? Because she said that they are going to do it in the lower grades. So I wanted to know if kindergarten or first grade, and if it's going to be in all the classes or just a pilot, or what was it?
There's going to be training. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a professional development calendar. We are right now, there's a pilot occurring after the NJ Ask that they're going to, the teachers have been working with Ms. Callis as far as how they're going to implement it, and then looking at continuing going into next year as well.
Okay.
And I actually do have the calendar in front of me. It's the 6th through 8th grade teachers are doing the training on the 23rd with the 9th through 12th grade teachers. So it looks like K-5's already been trained. I guess maybe a first round of training, and 6 through 12 is going to be trained in a couple days.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, Buffy Wild Greenberg, 123 Park Place. I just want to follow up on Michelle's very courageous comments. I was kind of disturbed tonight to hear the district not take ownership for their non-opt-out policy, which is a policy. It's a very punitive policy, as we've heard Michelle say tonight. The fact is the district does have discretion on if it wants to make accommodations to students who choose to opt out, who exercise their right to opt out. I've also been in touch with the person who is referenced in the Montclair memo, and I have the emails which I'm happy to forward to the board, but I have been emailing with him for the last couple weeks. My initial email said, what is the policy on opt out? And he responded, This is Mr. Steele Dadsey. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing his name. The state does not have an opt-out policy or provision in the administrative code for statewide testing. Please contact your school district regarding the district's policy. So he's throwing it back to you. You're throwing it back to the state, and he's throwing it back to you. When I then went and I asked him I then sent him Montclair's policy, and I said, I've just learned of Montclair's policy. Send him the link. Just to clarify, is the policy articulated in Montclair's memo a statewide policy to be implemented in all districts? He then wrote, the answer to your question is no. That is Montclair's policy. The state does not have an opt-out policy. So if you want to have a punitive policy, if you want to have a regressive policy of sit and stare, of calling children belligerent for choosing to not participate in a test that we all know is flawed, that you yourselves passed a resolution criticizing high-stakes testing, then that's fine, but then own that decision. Don't just put it on the street. Thank you.
I would like to just say where my concern comes from with this. I think tonight is just as good a night as any to say where my sentiment comes from, and that comes from a place of racial and economic segregation. My fear, if we allow opt-out to happen and to pass a policy, that we are going to racially and economically segregate our testing classrooms, and that comes from my 20-plus experience 20 years of being in this district. I've seen it with special education students being segregated. I have that serious concern, and I think we would need to study that more before we move forward with any type of policy.
I mean, I'd like to respond to that. You know, I grew up in Highland Park. We all know there's a serious racial segregation problem, especially in our high schools. I graduated in '97. It was a serious problem then. From what I understand, I'm sure it's a very serious problem now. Obviously, integration is key to rectifying segregation and any kind of achievement gaps that are present in our schools. You know, one response I have to that is then have a coherent policy where you educate all families that this is their right. If only certain people know that they have the right to opt out, of course, only certain people are going to be opting out. So then I put it back on the district to actually educate people about their right, educate people about what your problems are with these tests, and show them that. I think that's honestly a bit of a red herring to say we're not going to have a coherent opt-out policy because I'm afraid it's going to further segregate our already extremely segregated schools.
And I think it would be naive to think that some parents are more invested in the day-to-day operations of their child more than others, and just providing that information does not necessarily still could mean that we have the haves and have-nots in this district at a greater and more clear, vision.
Well, I'm going to kind of jump forward a little bit to something that I'm going to talk about a little bit later during the President's report, but I attended a hearing in Trenton on Thursday about the bill that we passed the resolution on, 3081, and it was a fantastic hearing. I wish I could play the audio for everybody here and we could all sit through it and listen to it, but one of the highlights for me was the presentation given by the New Jersey Association of School Administrators. 5 superintendents sat up there, including the superintendent from South Brunswick, Riverdale, Madison, and I'm off the top of my head, I don't remember the other 2. And their testimony was very specific to standardized testing, very specific to Park, to what's coming down the pike for districts. And he concluded his comments by saying, if this legislature does not take control of this issue, I guarantee you, parents will. And this is what we've seen in New York. Over the last 2 years, as they've implemented these more rigorous tests, the parents each year, every year, more and more opt out, to where this year in New York, it was over 30,000. So we have superintendents at the state level in the legislature saying, go ahead, don't act, the parents will. And I think that's what you're seeing in this room. We're not acting, so the parents are. Other superintendents, other districts are getting ahead of this. They're going to Trenton, they're lobbying their legislatures. He made a point of saying they're lobbying both the Republican and the Democratic legislators because this is not a partisan issue. So I disagree with you wholeheartedly, Adam, and I've seen the parents who are opting out in other states. They're not just of one race, they're of multiple races. And I think this is an issue that we're going to have to wrestle with eventually. Now, next year, another year.
So do you want to talk about I would support, which is a crazy thing? I would support us not giving the test at all to anybody. That's where I stand. I will not support a policy that allows some kids in this district to have something that other parents will not give them, or it will just create inequality in this district that I know we've been fighting for so long to change. So
Let me just say I'm glad you said that and not me.
But I'm just saying, I think every person on this board, and Dan said it in an excellent way, every parent would opt out if we gave them the chance. My issue is when somebody walks through the hallways of this district, do they see certain kids in one room and certain kids in another room, certain kids taking a test and certain kids not taking a test? Those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we create policy like this.
Liz Estes, 311 North 4th. I just wanted to ask about the first two items, eliminating the first and the second positions, so those 3 positions. My question is I just wanted to know what kind of due diligence the board asked the superintendent to do as those positions are eliminated. Is there, I heard things about what Ms. Shimon does that nobody seemed to know tonight. So I don't have a lot of confidence in those decisions if I don't feel like people have a real grasp of the power of those positions, what's going on in them. Maybe there are things that are going on, I'm sure there are things going on in the personnel committee that I don't have any connection to, and I would just feel better if I knew that somebody had a list of what, has anybody interviewed the Title I coordinators to find out what they do every day and before we eliminate those positions?
I know.
I'm not going to discuss personnel and those internals.
But we've seen the job, at least the beginnings of the...
I've not seen the Title I job description.
You've seen, what we've talked about the skill.
Aren't they posted on the site?
No.
Yeah.
I don't know if
I'm not aware whether they are
if I was
or not.
supposed to go look for it, I wasn't
Right.
informed that I was supposed to go look for it.
But the board has had a number of discussions about the roles and responsibility of Title I coordinators and have seen the new job descriptions of where those roles and responsibilities have been folded into other positions.
We have?
We've talked in terms of the budget of what the roles and responsibilities of those positions were, and we talked about where and how some of those roles and responsibilities are going. As we've said, the project manager tasks, the data analyst is taking on some of those roles, the administration in other ways are taking on some of those roles.
But Liz has asked about a very specific task analysis, and I don't believe that we've seen that.
So for instance, like
I read the email you
tutoring
sent.
program, what happens with the tutoring program? How much time do they spend on the tutoring program? How many parents are they in touch with on the tutoring program? How many students does Ms. Shimon talk to? How many of her discipline problems, how many is she handling every week? Who's doing that kind of work? It just seems like if that hasn't been done, can it be done in the future? Where is that work? So there's no answer.
I think the answer is that the items are discussed in personnel, and we can't discuss personnel here at this table.
But it's.
Look, we got the email that you sent, and I think it's it's definitely good, sort of organizing principle for us moving forward, and I think the committee will take your suggestions in hand. And I appreciate that.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to see some evidence.
Good evening. I'm Melanie McDermott of 330 South 3rd Avenue in Highland Park, and I have a couple questions and then sort of more of a comment reflection. So there are a couple things I haven't heard about. I mean, they're not on the agenda, but I'd like an update on. So before the budget, I forget which meeting it was, but it was before the budget came to the fore, and there was a discussion about scheduling and scheduling changes. I wonder if there was any update on that, because there was even some discussion of scheduling changes as early as the fall. So I wondered if where that stands.
There's no update at this point.
Okay. So, as a proponent of deeper and more extended and more inclusive discussion on the scheduling issue, I take that as good news. The second thing I'm really interested to hear about is about the schedule for advertising the position for the high school principal, and if there's going to be some kind of parental involvement in a search committee. I want to volunteer, put that on the record. What's the latest on the high school principal?
Position was posted. We have resumes that have been collected right now. We're using the same process that we've used with the other principals. This is a screening. There's a committee level at the building that includes parents, teachers, and administration, and then they make a recommendation. It comes to the administration, there's another round, and then there's a recommendation to the board.
Okay, good. I'm glad to hear the position's been advertised. I haven't seen the job description myself. And has the committee you've referenced already been formed?
Not at this point.
Okay, all right. So that's good. And then I just wanted to, I guess ask a little more and reflect a little bit more on the racial disparities in our district, and I think it's a great thing that we're having this discussion, as several others have said, and it's a very important one, and it has to go on. I did have one just on the presentation. I had one question. Economically disadvantaged, how is that defined? Is that school reduced, free and reduced lunch? Okay. So I recognize that we don't have other data on the individual families, nor there are probably privacy issues, and anyway. But I would just point out that a binary is not the same thing as showing no relationship, so that data doesn't show that there's no relationship between wealth and performance. It does show something significant. But there's a real difference there. We have a binary. A binary is not a relationship. So it could still be that if you break down those classes further, there's important relationships there. Nonetheless, I think we all agree that it's pointing to a very important issue in our town, and I wanted to add to the voices that say that, call for, and this is both on the board, but it's on all of us. I think the Rethink Highland Park, I want to commend the students who did that. I would like to see experts and people with exposure to innovative ways of tackling this, and some of the research on this in seminars and town halls and committees. I think that what the administration has proposed is important for improving our schools, no doubt, but there's a lot more that can be done. And the little that I know about it says that one of the really, really key things is to have parental involvement across all the races, socioeconomic classes, in the school district. That's everything from, crucially, in the classroom, but also in the board meetings and also on the board. So we have some board vacancy to fill. I think we could do some affirmative action there on the board. I think the board should look like our town, which it does not right now. So I just think there's a lot more we can do, and I, commend the start of this of this frank discussion. I did. So but I did want to complicate the matter, or just ask a little bit more about tracking. When we talk about tracking, and tracking having been eliminated, or we're talking up to Bartle, yeah. Is that the way we use it?
Yeah.
The term. Okay, so the honors.
Levels.
Pardon?
We have different levels in the high school. Levels, we call them in the high school.
Okay, so in high school that's called levels. So that's the honors program and the AP programs are different.
It's the same.
So have we eliminated?
In practice, it's the same.
No, I get it.
Right, but we have not eliminated them.
So when you said eliminated tracking, you didn't mean that we have eliminated the honors program.
We've eliminated it at Bartle, and we're looking right now as far as, again, you're talking about trying to make sure that the schedules meet student need. Okay, you're never going to, eliminate that, and we've had a little bit of discussion about this as far as even within the classroom, teachers are going to group students, but the whole purpose is the fact that it's fluid, okay, that they're not in that track for the entire year. At the high school level, when you start getting into specific content areas, it's a little bit different.
Sorry, did you
And-
say flipped? I didn't quite follow. That has to do with, I didn't get the terminology.
Fluid.
Fluid. Okay, so you're saying teachers will group, like you'll have reading circles or something like that.
Correct.
Right, because that's part of differentiated instruction. You can't, I guess this is not Lake Will Be Gone, right? So at the end of high school, we expect to find kids at different achievement levels with different levels of ambition. We don't like to see that reflect their race as if that was a predictor of their outcomes, and that's very disturbing. But I think that it's important, if you're eliminating tracking at Bartle, but by the time you get to high school seniors, some kids are going to take calculus, other kids aren't going to take calculus. Somewhere in between and there has to be this leveling going on, and I think the comments about the opportunities, for moving between levels are very well taken, and that's something that we can look at. But we're also talking about gifted and talented, so I just don't want, our gifted and talented kids to get lost in there. I don't want that. Not every kid wants to take an AP class. Not every kid has the same vision of their life. They might want to be in a rock and roll band. We're not here to make everybody look the same coming out in Highland Park. And anyway, throwing that into the mix, that at the same time that I think proficiency is a different story. Every kid coming out of Highland Park deserves and needs to be proficient. That doesn't mean that, and there deserves to be affirmative action about AP classes. I absolutely think that's a great idea. I don't think it's wise to talk about eliminating prerequisites. That's different than assisting individual kids to meet their dreams and having this kind of individualized approach. Anyway, I look forward to more discussion on this, and I challenge all of us to kind of bring the programming to the town that will help us really think outside the box on what to do about our racial gaps.
I would say two things to that. The first is that there's no belief that you're going to take the highest performing students and you're going to take the students that are not performing and squeeze that band to where it's a very narrow band. Okay, that's been proven not to be true. But what you do want to do is you want to take, let's say, the bell curve and shift the entire bell curve so that all students are making significant growth and have those opportunities. When we get to the high school, I would actually disagree as far as that we need to give them twice as much time for those courses, because that's been the problem with remediation in general, is that they take longer to learn the information when they're already behind. Okay, they're already not on the same level with their peers. So the goal is really acceleration, is how do we make sure that we provide the most amount of opportunities for those students? How do we make sure that every student that wants to has the ability to take calculus? And you referenced the schedule at the beginning. That was the crux of what we talked about, which is how do you create scheduling where you allow the opportunities for students to have the most flexibility within that schedule, where all students could take calculus if they chose to, as opposed to essentially being locked out. If I start within this class, I have no ability in the current schedule to get to calculus if I haven't already been on that track.
Okay, so and when we do get into this more, I think the suggestion that a board member made that would really help me, and I heard it from the board, is presentations that sort of give us some examples that we can wrap our heads around, because I'm actually not seeing the connection between block scheduling and levels. I'm just not getting it. I appreciate what you're saying, and I think I'm agreeing that there should be the opportunity to move levels. I'm not seeing how the rotating schedule messes up that option, or how the block scheduling, achieves it, but that's a longer conversation. Perhaps.
And I could just give you a real quick example. If you allowed a student to take Algebra 1 in the fall and Geometry in the spring on a 4x4 schedule, that allows them to accelerate, where then they could get to calculus if they chose to, even if they didn't start. Or on a rotating schedule, you don't have the same ability in order to do that unless you double block it. Or the worst scenario is what a lot of schools did. I know they did it when I was in school. For students that failed, all right, you failed math, so what do? They give you Algebra 1 and Geometry at the same time. Okay, and so it's the fact that you're trying to make sure that it's set up for success, that they're able to really concentrate on those courses and be successful there, that we provide the supports to ensure that they are. and make sure that they all have those opportunities and that they're open at the end.
So a kid would have to do an entire year. So if they wanted to catch up and do Algebra 1 in the fall and Geometry in the spring, they'd be on an individualized instruction program anyway, because there's nobody else who's doing an entire year in one semester.
Well, that's again, I mean, we've had very little, you know, the conversation we had was just about the strengths and weaknesses of the kinds of schedules
Yeah.
that there are.
So
That's as far as we've gotten so far,
Uh-huh.
and that's what it's based on. It's based on there are strengths and weaknesses with every schedule, and it's trying to make sure, at least in the conversation, of how do you maximize the potential
Right.
of each schedule, how do you minimize the impact for the ones that it doesn't really work with,
Right.
and how do you make sure you pair those classes. I know when we talked with the foreign language teachers, they were talking about the fact that, you know, even with the rotation, they'd rather see the kids every day because it helps with language acquisition.
Absolutely.
So you're talking about trying to pair whatever the course is with the
Right.
model that it would be most effective. And, you know, I had referenced before, you know, I always think that a blended schedule using the best of all of them and trying to match the courses
Yeah.
is always the best circumstance
Yeah.
for them.
Okay, well, I like I said, I look forward to seeing it like up on the screen with this is what a blended schedule day looks like. I think there's almost no subject that doesn't benefit from almost daily contact. And I want to put in a plea on behalf of my son in particular, but not him alone, that study hall be part of some mix. That's getting into the weeds now, so I'll look forward to future conversations about that. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Melanie.
I think you took the sign up.
Mel, do you have the sign-in sheet?
Yep.
Thank you,
So
Melanie.
I'll just start so we can save time. Randy Sumner, 215 Amherst Street. And I will just comment that when we talk about socioeconomics within our town, that I believe, looking at these address lists, that I am the first person up this evening from the Triangle section. And I know there's some of us in the, thank you very much. It's interesting that I'm following. First of all, I want to thank, I've had the opportunity this week to speak with some of the board members as well as the superintendent, and I do want to thank you all for that time and answering some of my questions. I have a follow-up that has a little bit to do with what just came up, but has not been discussed, which is I would urge, I'm a little concerned about class selection process. And so I would urge, as part of this, the transition to a new principal at the high school especially, that there's some time taken to look at the entire process of class selection. I've spoken to a number of parents who've, like my eldest son, have a 9th grader who will be going into 10th grade. And the process of class selection from middle school to high school involves guidance counselor support and involves a little bit of a one-on-one with the guidance counselor and with the student. And in the case of middle school to high school, also involves the parents a little bit. And I understand how we need to train our high schoolers to be independent. And so that the process after 9th grade then no longer involves the parent. I do understand that. I think that that makes a certain amount of sense. However, this particular year, the process did not involve guidance counselor support for the students. The students were all in a library together, or in the media center. They had the access to the computers, and it was the first time where students were inputting the information themselves in the system. And my understanding in talking with both the principal of the school after the process, as well as a couple of other parents, is basically there were teachers and guidance counselors in the room with the students to help them from the process, but that would necessitate the student actually asking for help. And I have a child that did not ask for help. So I have a child that picked all of their classes for next year without a one-on-one with a guidance counselor, without us seeing what the options were, and without that process. And I recognize that this was an error because there was a significant transition in process and it was shoved together in time. And I will say I had a very good conversation with the principal the following week about the incident. And I felt very assured that all of the children, like my child, that did not choose a second option. So basically my child only chose, this is what I want. And as we all know, that this is what I want isn't necessarily what they get, and so the process is that they're supposed to have a second choice on all their electives, a second choice on whether they take a study hall or not. And at least in mine, I know my child doesn't have that in the system. So I was assured that when the process comes due and when they start going through everything, that from the principal, that would all get looked at, because my child was one of many that this happened to. And so now that there's a transition happening in the principalship, I'm concerned about all those students that might have gotten lost in this first process. As I investigated this and I talked to a couple parents, what I've basically heard in general over the past several years is that the support and the information back and forth to kids and to parents about class selection and when the schedule comes due hasn't been fantastic for years. And so with that in mind, I think it's a real concern, especially as we look at trying to ensure that we give every child the most opportunity they have. A parent that's very involved, that's willing to call the principal, that's willing to say, look, my kid had a problem, okay, my kid's gonna get served.
Yep.
But I recognize that I took that effort, and many parents don't.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think, sorry, why don't you respond first?
No, again, I would apologize first. My conversation with Mr. Williams was that the sheets were sent home, that there was an opportunity for parents and for students to discuss it, and then they were coming in, and they should have had their sheet filled out prior to coming in, so it was just then entering it, and then there would be follow-up on the other end. I share your concerns. I actually had a conversation with when we were talking about trying to get not only the classes, but the classes that they want, because when I had spoke with some students, they had said, well, I'm in a class and me and the other 20 students in the class had no interest in that class, but it was a default within the schedule. Okay, that's the only thing that was available to us. So if that's a concern, not just for you, to other ones, Mr. Soto will follow up tomorrow, and that'll be something that we can look at, and we can send those out to parents so parents can check them again before the schedule is built, because that is a critical aspect of it. You have to have good data going in, you have to have the right selections, so we know how many course selections and how many each course needs to be set up. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
And as I said, I did have a very good conversation with Dr. Williams afterwards, but again, he's not going to be there, so.
Right. Tim, can I ask a question? Why this seems like a complete deviation from the process that we have followed in the past, when there was actually an opportunity for parents to, if they were able to, come into the guidance office with your student from 9th to 10th, from 10th to 11th, and do course selection and do a one-on-one with the guidance counselor. I'm wondering why we're not doing that anymore.
What we weren't doing was it wasn't going to be setting up each one of those individuals. That we were looking at trying to say that if those selections are done, if they've had the conversation, or if the parents and the students have had the conversation, that that information be pretty accurate. And when we're looking at that, then we would be following up as need to make sure that it matches with
in the
what those
past. So
needs
the
are.
guidance counselor was the one who had the information about what courses the student had been recommended for, whether they were going into an AP course, or so how is that information being conveyed to families now?
I don't know exactly what those recommendations are. That was something, again, if you remember back in January, that's when Dr. Williams came and made his presentation. At that point, he had raised as far as the course selection. So where it is right now, I can't speak to.
I can say as a personal testimony that meeting, which at the time was with Mr. Lobianco, was invaluable to our course selection from 9th to 10th grade. I mean, from 8th to 9th grade. That was an incredible opportunity to really talk about, for my child, to talk with the guidance counselor about what their wants, what their needs were. Do they want to be in AP classes when they get to high school, when they get to senior, or do they want to be, on a different track?
Yep.
And that opportunity with the guidance counselor was invaluable at that time. And I would say I desperately wish that it could happen from 9th to 10th grade, from 10th to 11th grade.
I'm thinking that the conversations that a student and a parent might have are much different than the conversations that a student and a parent and a guidance counselor may have, and to have that professional component to that conversation could be critical.
Parents can go in with their children, so maybe that's part of the message that needs to get across, is to say, of course, if you want to sit down with your guidance counselor and your child, that you're absolutely free to do that.
But are we moving from a system where the expectation is what will happen, to a system where that's what will happen?
This is about,
available. I don't know that it was the expectation.
I think
don't want to misconstrue.
Last time we had this conversation, Claire and I had a disagreement on it. Remember, we talked about some parents not every parent knows or goes into the guidance office. There is a great sample that I have, and the previous administration has looked at, and I'll forward it to this one, of a letter that gets sent home in 9th grade, but it's also a 4-year chart that goes with that, and it's not a set in stone, but it sets the expectations for the year and the preceding years and where do you want to be, and it's something that would go home to every parent. It's not something. It would be. We can set it up any way we want it, but it would be something that initiated by the guidance counselor and asked for consultation. And even if consultation is not given, that letter of expectations or vision would go home to every child.
But one of the things I would urge is that sending a letter home tends to only then involve the parents that are a comfortable enough socioeconomic and educated experience to then question it and follow up on it. And so if the issue is that we're trying to, to move that chart over, then just sending a letter home about class selection in high school is not going to help those kids. Thank you very much. I really appreciate all
Thank you
your
very much, Randy.
Quick, actually. I apologize for my attire. My name is Tim McKinnon, 22 North 4th Avenue. I heard you were discussing the so-called achievement gap, so I just wanted to come in and throw down a couple of thoughts I've had on that, which is actually, that issue is actually what initially got me very interested in this whole school debate to begin with, whenever it all started. There's a couple things about that I feel growing up and from reading literature and things of that nature. First, as to tracking, I remember when I was a kid going to urban public schools. Recently, before then, there was an activist. I don't know if he's familiar with anyone nationwide, but he was a Washington, D.C. activist, a guy named Julius Hobson. Very, very strong activist for civil rights. And he fought tooth and nail to remove the tracking program from the D.C. public schools then because he felt it was unfair and there was a racial disparity there. And that was a lot of work, and he was a giant. A lot of people stood on his shoulders after that. So to me, to come to a town like this in 2013 and realize we still had tracking was actually kind of shocking to me. I mean, coming up from my perspective and growing back and realizing that even hearing people use the words tracking is a Jim Crow legacy. I mean, I've even heard that stated all over the place where I was growing up. So to come here and find that happening is just troubling to me. Also, the other reason that I got involved with this is the digital divide effect, which is another thing why I think it's important to have technology in the classrooms and have technology available. Things like tracking and the digital divide are basically structural conditions or arrangements. They can find inequality where it lives. I mean, we didn't create inequality here in Highland Park, but if these two kinds of things they're structural conditions or arrangements, and when they find inequality, they're going to enhance it and they're going to reproduce it. So if we can do something in this town, especially the fact that our town is not marked by a whole lot, we have poverty, but we don't have a whole lot of crime and social disorganization. We have some, but nothing like environments like in Trenton or Patterson or Newark. And I think we have a real duty and an obligation and a chance to help the kids who are less affluent in our town. So that's why I originally got involved in this, and that's why I wanted to come down tonight and just say my piece.
Thank you, Tim.
Hi, Anna Pure. I live at 344 Becker Street, and I didn't want to speak today, although there's several things that bother me in the course of the presentation and the discussion, and also related to things that happened last week. So I'll just say my few bits, and excuse me if I'm digressive. First, I want to thank the board for talking to us, because it certainly wasn't the case when I started attending Board of Education meetings, which was around October. So I think there's been a lot of progress in that sense. Thank you. Thank you for your service. We appreciate it, and thank you for changing your attitude. I think it's really the way. Now, that doesn't apply to the way Mr. Ross treated Michelle. I think that was very rude and patronizing, and I think not everybody's treated the same at this stand, and we should be careful with that, and I hope you'll have a chance maybe to talk about that in private. Now, I want to follow up and applaud Denise and Melanie's comments on the need to have a frank and educated conversation about race in this town, and also Tim's comments about socioeconomics. And I think part of this conversation is talking about race when pertinent and using other terms when relevant, in particular term ethnicity. I think in the conversation, I know those are the terms that have been, the categories have been handed out to you by the state. You have to talk to those categories, and that's the way they divide it. But we could be a bit more subtle in our terminology, and in particular, using race to talk about Hispanics is, really inaccurate. So even the census is more subtle than that. So I would be very careful in the use of those categories. That doesn't mean that we don't need to talk about race. We need to talk about race, but we need to talk about race in an educated way. And if I have time, I don't know, do I have time?
Sure, you have another minute, please.
Last week's meetings, I know were meant well, they were designed as focus group. Not everybody is comfortable talking in front of a camera or being recorded, etc. I don't know if you realize how much havoc they raise in the community. There's maybe 250 angry messages related to those conversations. I invite you to read them on the Facebook pages. It's nasty, it's depressing, and it's really a waste of time because we should have been in Trenton applauding Darcy's. At the time we were just on Facebook fighting amongst ourselves. So the intention was good, probably, but the results were pretty bad. So I would invite you, a lot of people feel strongly against meetings, private meetings, meetings to which some people are invited, some people are not invited. I'd be curious to know if there were any minorities represented. I don't need an answer, but I'd be curious. I don't need to know, but I would suggest at some point before the end of the year, before June, having some type of, not a town hall meeting, but some type of relaxed conversation, maybe videotape, maybe not, but public. I think it's important that conversations that are not confidential remain public, because the amount of, it creates so much stress in the community, having those focus groups, secret conversations, that it's really a waste of time. I think it's a waste of our time, a waste of your time to then try to fix the problems it raises. And I would say, I don't know if it can be done at the same time, but I think if there's a conversation, it needs to be as inclusive as possible. I think the problem starts here. I don't know how many of you would identify as Black or Hispanic. I'm Hispanic because I speak Spanish. It's a pretty random. Mr. Soto, maybe, right? Not too many of us, right? Asian, you too. Asian, maybe a couple. Right. And so that's part of the problem.
Thank you.
And I think the solution would be to talk to people like the PTO. There's a person in the PTO that's very involved, and just try to connect with those communities and bring them to you, right? Maybe not at 7 p.m., but on different days of the week, at different times, and times where people are available. Just explore those possibilities and have as much, inclusiveness in the people you talk to as possible. Sorry for exceeding my time.
Thank you.
Well, and I will address that. I've had meetings throughout this year with people that had questions and with small groups for exactly the reasons that you described. And so, the purpose of those is to allow people to have a safe environment where they can ask questions and, get more information. And they're not secret meetings, and it's not a discussion of policy, and it's, those aren't the things that are existing. And I've offered from the beginning that anybody that wants more information to feel free to contact me to give you the information. And so, the last two meetings, I actually had it in new business, but they were really productive.
Yep.
It gave us an opportunity for a dialogue. It gave them an opportunity to ask their questions, ask follow-up questions, which we've talked from the beginning really is not the format of a board meeting. And hopefully it was insightful for them. It certainly was insightful as the administration to be able to get other perspectives and be able to hear from them and have a constructive dialogue.
And Tim, this is me saying that I think you do your job when you set up these meetings. These are what are the roles and responsibilities of your office, and I think that they, as you've seen and brought back to us, they've become very productive.
Weren't these meetings parent requested?
Yeah.
So parents actually
Right.
requested these meetings. These were not meetings that the superintendent, but that makes a big difference because you're sort of accusing him of having
no, I didn't
excluded
accuse
people. And these are meetings that parents requested.
Right.
Look, I really don't want to get into this conversation because there's been
Well, I'll-
50 messages about this.
I'll say, I mean, I found them to be, I was at both meetings last week. I found them to be extremely productive. I think what happens in, an environment like this is that even in the best of circumstances, there's really no opportunity for a continued dialogue back and forth. And, at these meetings, parents had questions. They came, they said, I want to meet with the superintendent. I have a lot of things that I'm concerned about. I would like answers to these questions. I haven't been able to come to a board meeting, or I'm not interested in having that discussion at a board meeting because the environment in the board meeting isn't, suitable for me, or I'm not interested in getting up in a podium. And I mean, it was great. There was not overall agreement. There was not the kind of, everyone wasn't on the same side of all the issues. There was a lot of pushback about things. And frankly, I think that we, if there are parents that are interested, I hope that we can have more of these meetings. And I hope that, when people have concerns, they can actually ask the administration about their concerns. If they would like to come in, groups of parents, that's certainly okay. I look forward to that moving forward.
But why not have those events public? I mean, we can have a friendly conversation in a public setting. We can work the terms. I just don't understand parents who don't feel comfortable. I mean, I understand the schedule. I can only be here today because my husband exceptionally is at home. Usually I have to leave or I can't come. So I understand very well the schedule constraints, but the other kind of mood concerns and that people are,
Some parents have concerns that they don't want to share, publicly, or
I understand those are
and so
private.
so you might not choose to have a meeting with the superintendent, and other people might, feel that it's their right as parents of students in this district to meet with the administration, and I think that's something that we should allow them to do if they're interested in doing so.
No government entity works in the sense that there's not conversations and development of understanding with with constituents outside of a public forum. Public officials meet with their constituents all the time. Interest groups meet with politicians all the time. Tim is meeting with anybody who has asked for a meeting with him. He's not setting up private meetings with people. We wouldn't allow him to do that, and it wouldn't be appropriate. We would agree with that.
Right, it's not allowed, right? I mean, that was my understanding. I wasn't talking about that. I was talking about being inclusive. We're constantly being asked for the meetings. It's just a bit disorienting because we've constantly been told there's a chain of command. When I have a problem, I take it to the teacher, then I take it to the principal. There's a chain of command. If everybody in the community that has a problem has to speak to the superintendent, I mean, you're not going to have a life. You don't want that. You don't want that. I mean, there's 800 people who have questions for the superintendent. You really want everybody to come to ask the questions, and what a waste of time. Can we get together, have conversations? I mean, what are people so afraid of? I understand private concerns, but then it would be one-to-one conversations. It wouldn't be a group of parents with similar interests. And in any case, we have to make sure that those people who are willing to bypass the chain of command and go to you directly are representative of the community. So there has to be a way that this private
Informal.
These meetings are not construed as representation of the community, because they're not. They're representation of like a particular group of people who have particular interests, problems, etc., and they have every right to be heard. But anyways, that wasn't my.
Since the beginning of the year, I have offered this. And I actually received a form letter back in the fall from parent after parent saying, no, we don't want private meetings, using the same verbiage that you're using. And the fact is that being able to talk to people, there has to be a safe environment. Yep. And if they have questions, they have a right to ask them. And that's something that I've done throughout this year. And, they've been productive. And they're more productive when people feel at ease, rather than having to sit here and, either use the podium or, be able to ask questions, things that they just have questions about or concerns about or aren't clear on. And again, I mean, that's part of what it is that we're trying to do. There's certainly when I look at the presentation from tonight, and, there were certain people that didn't want this information shared about the racial gap. I actually had a meeting, back in the winter where I was told, you shouldn't share this information, and this is something that, it should be shared, and it should be clear. And, I think I hope that it gives a greater context to the vein that we've been working in, what we've been trying to do, and the changes that have been made. And, this has been something, again, from the time that I started here, of trying, we talked about the performance reports, and we've talked about these different things. And it's not a judgment, okay, based on, every individual kid. It's not saying that the schools are terrible or failing. I've never used any of that verbiage. What I've said is that this is where we are, and every kid deserves a great education here. And we want to make sure that we give that to them. And when we find areas that are deficient, when we find kids that we're not serving to the best of our ability, we should address it. We have a moral obligation to address it. And having those conversations with parents, especially when you're talking about, parents that are disenfranchised, that maybe their child, maybe they don't, you just said, this is not representative of the entire community.
Right.
But having that outreach and allowing them to be able to come and be able to have individual small group conversations, I think is an important aspect of what it is that we do.
Fair
Thank you.
enough.
Thank you, Anna.
This is not representative either. I totally agree with that
Indeed.
point. And thank you for starting this conversation. I mean, it's not a new conversation, but maybe it hasn't been put out in terms as frank as that. But I do think that not everybody, those minority groups, they're not going to come seek you. You have to go seek them if you really want to break, change things.
Absolutely.
We know that.
Yeah, thank you, Anna.
Hi, Lorena Edenbaum again, 201 South 2nd Avenue. Thank you, Melissa, because you
201
let me
South- what was
talk.
it?
I didn't catch your name or her address.
201 South 2nd.
201 South 2nd, Lorena Edenbaum. Thank you. I was one of the parents that asked for the meeting, and the people that I wanted to share the meeting with, I wanted to talk about curriculum and the gap. So I invited educators, I invited curriculum specialists, I invited reading recovery teachers, and we had people from that I normally are in my circle. So there were people from my soccer sons team, from my kids swim team, and I make sure I invited different ethnicities. So there were Hispanic represented at the table. There was a technology specialist at the table. I invited people from the Chinese community, from the Indian community. I also invited people from low income, because I was part of the task force. So one of the main goals is that the community reach to everyone. So there were like 20 people in the meeting that I attended, and I'm really grateful because it got a lot of our questions answered. And I didn't want to make it public because I wanted to be really people that is with that in mind, curriculum gap. So I didn't know you, and I didn't think like, some other people, like journalists or something that could bring something to the table. So.
Yep. You guys actually can't have a conversation at the table. Thank you, Lorena.
I'm Melissa Newman from 215 Montgomery. To just do one comment about what the last two speakers said, maybe one possible solution is that Mr. Capone or Mr. Ross, or both of them jointly, could write up a summary of what happened at this meeting, so anything that was discussed that's student-specific and private can be kept out, but anything that would be beneficial that the whole community could know about, that we could know about it. Because there was this sense of, at least from my perspective, people were like, I went to the meeting, I know something you don't know. And you would say, okay, can you please share it? And they're like, no, if you email me, I would email them and I'd say, can you please tell me what went on? And they're like, no. Well, actually, they just ignored it. And that's where I think a lot of the anger and frustration that Anna was expressing comes from that, was this whole, I know something you don't know. So I think we need to separate out the parts and say, yes, we got to keep private information private, but information that could benefit from that meeting that everybody should be aware of, that should be shared.
Thank you.
The second thing I wanted to talk about was the comment about the people that are, I guess, in the lowest 40% not being here. correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm going to assume that a lot of those people might be people that work 2 jobs or single-parent homes or something like that, where they wouldn't have the ability to have daycare or a babysitter to watch their children. And maybe an alternative to doing these 7:30 at night to 10, 11 o'clock at night meetings is maybe do it right around the time when parents pick up their kids from the aftercare program and ask the people at the aftercare program to just stay a little bit longer so that those parents could then attend the meeting and participate more in their children's education, but yet at the same time know that someone's helping them to watch their children during that time. So they don't have to choose between going to a board meeting and their children. The third issue I wanted to talk about was the comment about that if we allowed people to opt out, that we'd have a segregation between the different parts of the community, that only the people that are the wealthy people or white people or whatever would opt out, and that the other people wouldn't opt out. An option I had presented in an email to the board and Mr. Capone was to allow students to do end-of-year portfolios, which could be like a demonstration of the growth they've done over the last year, the knowledge that they've obtained. And this is something that, you send it out at the beginning of the school year and say, hey, this is an option that you can do instead of the end of the year test to present this end of year portfolio, and then the kids know about it, that they have one of those options. I know people are going to say that's not an option because everybody has to take the test and blah, blah, blah. But I think there are ways that you could allow students to opt out and not have the gap between races. That's all.
Thank you, Melissa.
Hi, Ann Gowan, 201 South 2nd. I'm neighbors with Lorena. We have the same address. Just briefly on the meetings, I agree, small group meetings are fine. I think that just to explain, some of the problem the community had was what we heard was a bunch of people got invited to meet privately with Mr. Capone, and you're not invited. And so it sounded like it was this board or administration initiated thing to invite certain people, maybe some supporters. So that's the impression that people got, and it sounds like perhaps that was an incorrect impression. But I would encourage you, if you're going to have small group meetings, which do sound like they were quite productive, to maybe advertise small group meetings, throughout the community, sign up list, 20 people, advertise in the Triangle, advertise around town. I think there was just sort of a misperception about what this meeting was. And I do think, though, that there are a lot more of these meetings where it's sort of like people like us coming to meet with Mr. Capone. That's going to create a little bit of an impression of private access, so it would be great to advertise small group meeting available with Mr. Capone, advertise that here and there.
We've been talking about that. And
great. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and I have to say, what Lorena
We've also
described.
done that, though, like we did the superintendent. I feel like some of these meetings, like the breakfast with the superintendent, those things became initiated by the community members who wanted that. They didn't want to come here and talk, and they wanted something.
Well, but that was public.
private.
Like
So
the
then we did
Irving
that,
one was.
And then people were saying,
just parents
he's not
asking
accessible,
for
he doesn't want to talk to us, so now he's talking to people, and then now that's not right. I'm confused.
I think I think the most important takeaway is that if there's interest in people having conversations, then they should have an opportunity to have conversations.
Want to have a conversation with him also, whether it's alone or if they're with a couple of other folks that share the same point of view.
Yeah.
If it is a conversation and they want that to be personal, then that's their prerogative.
Of course.
We can go put out notes about that.
No.
And to my knowledge, Tim hasn't denied a request to meet with him. Is that correct, Tim?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Well, but from my takeaway from what Lorena just came and told us, which I thought was fantastic, and I'm glad to hear about that, but what it strikes me as is a parent setting up a task force. That sounded very much like a task force. I specifically asked for people who were curriculum and people who had technology
They had
experience.
questions. They just asked questions.
Lorraine can do whatever she...
There was no recommendations that came as a task force.
Can I just finish my statement?
Sure.
That's what it sounded like, that there were people, she specifically asked people, and I'm not criticizing her, I'm just saying this is what I heard, that she specifically asked for parents with specific interests or skills to come together to problem solve around, it sounded like, around the achievement gap. And I think...
Well, no, they asked questions about concerns they had about their kid. My kid is not having a great year in Bartle because of X.
I'm sorry,
or
did I
this kind of
mishear her
thing.
about the gap? I thought that's what I heard her say. I thought that's what I heard her say. And I'm not saying I think that's a fantastic idea, but I think lots of people have agreed with that idea that that's something that we should do moving forward, is the point that I'm trying to get at.
Right.
Is that I think those kind of task force on different issues about, issues around race, issues around the achievement gap, issues around curriculum, I think we as a board should be looking toward setting up those meetings on specific issues with the entire community.
Right, but just because parents want to have those conversations, it does not make it a bad thing, and it's not a test.
I don't think I said the word bad, so.
But I think it was the implication was that.
How was it the implication? I'm saying what it sounded like was a task force, and that moving forward, I think the idea of task force is something that unilaterally people have agreed on.
I think we all agree on
that
task
was
forces.
my point.
Speaking of task forces,
Hi, Mr. Task Force.
Oh, no. I don't know his address, but my name is Matthew Hirsch. I live at 333 Felton Avenue. I do want to just say about the communications task force that is one of the things that we have discussed extensively, is identifying some key areas and establishing citizen advisory boards, and so those recommendations are forthcoming. I just wanted to say in regard to these meetings to which I was not invited or involved, but I did read about.
I wasn't invited either, though.
Yeah, right. I mean, I just wanted to offer a little bit of a different perspective. I was really happy about some of the feedback that I read. I was kind of ecstatic, actually, because as somebody who has been, very frustrated at times, like this was a positive. And I think in this climate, there's a heavy burden on the board and the administration to have more of those meetings. And I think the more that you do that, the more positive feedback you're going to get. Just like at the communications task force, we believe that engaged citizens with strong civic networks can build up communities, and solve all kinds of problems, and break down barriers. So I think that's if there's a formula there for those meetings. I would just recommend to really go with it. And again, from everything that I heard about those meetings, I heard that they were wildly productive. The folks who attended were very satisfied. Maybe didn't like all of the answers, but they got the answers. I think that's kind of the general understanding. And that's I think that's the spirit in which a district should function. That's what I want to say about that. Thank you.
thank you, Matt. Is there any other public comment? Okay, Claire?
Claire.
You need to move.
Claire, what?
If you could move the
Communications
curriculum items.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wait. Gotta get up to it. Hold on. I would like to move items 1 through 5 on the curriculum part of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion of any of the items? Okay.
Hold on,
Linda?
can you give me a minute to get to it?
Oh, so just
No,
wait.
that's okay.
Darcy
Sorry, I
needs a
just had to
second.
pull everything back up.
Linda, can you mark me as a yes for all, please?
Sorry, I'm good.
I don't think so. I don't think his vote can be
I'd rather just
counted.
mark you absent.
He doesn't care.
We'll take
are
the
we
vote
ready?
without him.
Okay, are we ready?
Yes.
Hey, they do it at the state level. They vote in
Mr.
absentia. They leave and then they register their vote before they go.
What'd you say?
I'm just saying they did that at the state meeting. I was kind of surprised. A lot of the assembly people would leave the meeting, and then at the end they do the roll call, and they'd be like, so-and-so left, but they gave a yes vote. So-and-so left, but they gave a yes vote. So, I mean,
That's
I don't know. Maybe
awesome.
we can do.
Maybe.
We have a quorum without Mr. Sherman. I would prefer for
Right.
him to vote for
Oh,
himself.
look, there he is, right there.
Okay. Well, so we had a
That's
lengthy enough discussion
I'm
to take care of
impressed.
that. Okay. Are we ready, Mr.
We're ready,
President?
we're ready.
Ms. Aversa?
Yes.
Ms. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Bull?
Yes.
Ms. Simarusti?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Mr. Sherber?
Yeah.
Ms. Sherber, pardon. I
Yes.
apologize. Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Wharton?
Yes.
Catherine?
I'd like to move items 1 through 18. Or one.
On the finance report? You going to second that, Jerry?
I second that.
Is there any discussion on those items? We are, oh no, okay.
Thinking ahead?
I do have just a quick question. Does the increase in school lunch prices, affect really in terms of funding or, the funding that we get from the state or?
The federal National School Lunch Program
thank you, yeah.
requires parity between the price they reimburse the district and the price the district charges for lunch. The district
below
is, district is not permitted to charge less than what the government gives us in reimbursements. We are on track to get to what is called parity. Each year we've been raising the price just 10 cents in order to get to that parity level, which we still are not at.
And which is what? I
don't know.
Yeah.
I don't have that number.
But above where we are.
It's probably around $3.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So are other districts around the state already at that level? And
Federal
we're-
government, every district that participates in the National School Lunch Program is required to comply with this legislated regulation.
Okay,
And
thank you.
This came into place 2 years ago.
But this will increase profits, though.
I would imagine so.
Yeah.
Increase, I'm sorry?
Profits.
Profits. And is there a limit on how much profit we can make on lunch, or?
We have to be, is there a limit?
But it has
No.
to break even.
It has to break even.
Is there a reason that we have to?
It's crazy.
It seems insane to
Yeah.
have to
That they have
charge
to-
students more if we don't,
We
if
made a
there's no
good,
monetary need on our part.
Well,
we made a
this-
good profit last year off the program.
The federal government requires that they do not reimburse the district more than the district would charge. Because otherwise, we're making money off the federal government, and they don't want it to be that way. They want parity. Profit levels are not their concern.
Right.
Right.
The answer is
We-
yes, it's
we're
ridiculous.
at a profit because we're running it efficiently.
Right.
And we don't have high equipment costs, although we do have equipment that will need to be replaced, and we have lots of repair costs.
And some of this money will go towards that replacement.
We are planning some replacements as we see the high priority.
Perfect.
Okay. Anything else on finance? Linda?
Ms. Aversa?
Yes.
Ms. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Bull?
Yes.
Ms. Simarusti?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Ms. Scherber?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Wharton?
Yes.
And could we have the personnel motion items?
Yeah, I'd like to move items 1 through 8, and then number 10 on the addendum.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion?
It's the resignation.
Yeah, okay. I just want to have it. I'm sorry.
Go on. I wanted to ask about there are public comments about the staff student support teacher position. The person who holds that position is moving into another teaching assignment?
Correct.
Okay. Now, to the concerns that were raised, I don't really get how this position could have been effective if the person was teaching 6 classes. So, I mean, that's something I just don't understand. But there was some testimony to the fact that there were duties that had a positive impact on students. So, could you just kind of go through some of the duties in that position, and then we're talking about the lunch and what's the word I'm looking?
Recess.
Lunch and recess, for example, and some of the discipline issues.
So again, our conversation, if you remember, a few months ago was in reference to the budget, and we were talking about, again, how it is that we cover all the administrative duties, and we were looking at, the amount of staff that we had to do. This was put up as a cut based on the fact that it was, I guess when it initially started, it was actually a full-time position. And it's been reduced over, however many years to where it was not a full-time position doing those positions. As far as the additional duties, again, we have a new principal coming in, and that's going to be something that, as they're looking at the schedule and making those decisions, they're going to have to identify how it is that they're going to use all their staff. And this was something that, again, the goal was to make sure that administrative duties are done by administrators.
And so things like the coverage, let's say, for lunch and recess. who's going to be doing that?
We already have a number of different people that are brought in. We have some that are part-time paraprofessionals. We have others that are that's part of what their duties are.
And discipline was a part of this position?
Discipline is an administrative duty.
So that would just be handled by the principal? Okay. And you're confident that if we eliminate this position and move that teacher to the classroom, that there's going to be no negative impact on students?
Yes, I believe that, again, number one, administrative duties have to be done by administrators, and number two, that there's an efficiency that this was something that we were going to be able to address, and that is, again, you know, the duties that are there. There's lots of buildings when we're talking about the needs that they have being run by a single principal. It's not 800 kids.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Is there any other discussion on the personnel items?
I mean, I was also very taken by the testimony both of Kim representing the HPEA and Liz in terms of what she's asked of the board and the administration in terms of a task analysis when we're looking at eliminating positions. And I mean, I really couldn't agree more wholeheartedly with that position, that if we're going to eliminate positions that have, whether it be direct or indirect contact with students, that we as a board should really see not only the tasks of the job that's being eliminated, but the tasks of the job that's being created. We should know where those tasks are being moved to before we move to eliminate those positions. And, you know, so for me personally, I'm not comfortable moving forward with either of those until I see that task analysis and I know more concretely who's going to be providing those services for our students.
And I would say my conclusion, I think, is different in terms of the comfort level moving forward, but I think that the process of something like the job descriptions, or if we're talking about the elimination of a position or the creation of a position, I think the board needs one more round of time to review some of the information. So if we could have that information discussed in personnel, then given to the board, and then we get that time to review that information and come back with questions so that we can actually have some meaningful dialogue about it and a better understanding. I think that would be helpful.
So are we tabling 1 and 2? Is that what I'm taking from this? Or are we saying this for moving forward?
I'm comfortable moving forward with 1 and 2 at this point.
I think we've had an exhaustive discussion, especially on 2.
Oh, well, I mean, I had some very specific questions about 2 in personnel that weren't able to be answered.
Were not able to be answered. We didn't talk about that in closed session, though.
I didn't know I was supposed to bring them up in closed session.
Is there a deadline for that? Can we push it a week? 2 weeks?
We discussed these positions back with the budget.
I know we have.
We've discussed these positions.
That's different than what we're discussing right
Really, as well, you're saying that the duties that you don't think are being done. Again, this is something that it's been done all year long, and you're talking about specifics as far as what's the overlap of those positions and who's going to do exactly what, who's going to monitor summer schools. There are principals in the building. I answered that. We've gone
I'm sorry,
through
but not
as
to
far
my
as
satisfaction. I mean, not to where there were specifics.
We've gone through that there are site managers that exist currently in the other positions. So that may not be to your satisfaction. I still believe that they were answered as far as the fact that these positions, that the job responsibilities have been covered.
So what particularly, I mean, I'm interested just in the sense that I feel comfortable moving forward, but I'd love for you to convince me not to feel comfortable moving forward.
I had very specific questions about summer school and how that was going to be implemented. I mean, and this, goes back to my personal experience, which I don't know that I'm necessarily all that interested in discussing at the board table, but, I did have experience over the summer with the summer school program, and the people who ran that program were very instrumentally involved and there on a daily basis and interacting with parents and students, and I want to know how that's going to be implemented under this new structure, and I haven't gotten an answer for
We
that.
don't have summer school, or am I thinking, are you referring?
No, we do have summer school. I mean, we have summer school
do?
for,
We don't have summer school.
What summer school program do we have?
We have the Title I program.
Oh, the Title I. Oh, the
Oh,
Title I.
okay, I
All
was
right.
thinking of.
which is for the most vulnerable students, which are the students that we really need to make sure we engage with in very direct, very specific, very measured, supportive ways. And I want assurances that that will be continued and maintained.
Can you assure that?
Yes.
Thank you.
Right. I would like to see that in a more detailed fashion, and how that one person is going to effectively meet all of those tasks.
I have confidence in the person.
And just to be told that this has been being done all year, again, we haven't seen what those tasks are all year. What have they done all year? What are the specific tasks that those two individuals were doing that now are being done by this one individual? It doesn't, to me personally, and I said this during the budget negotiations as well, or I guess not negotiations, but the budget discussions, that how does one person who was hired not to do that position then assume the jobs of two other people and still do the job they were hired to do? That, to me, that doesn't make sense in my head, that someone was hired in one position to do whatever they were hired to do and then were able to absorb the job responsibilities of two other people. I'd like to see on paper how that works.
Well, and that's true. We've tried to hire great people that can absorb the jobs in a crisis situation. It's the same way that because we had a budget issue, okay, and that we were looking at, the fact that we would have to raise taxes that nobody wanted to do and have to make cuts, which nobody wants to do, and be in a position where we can do it with fewer people to be able to take on more jobs. It's the reason we didn't fill the principal positions with interims. It's the reason that we've made other cuts along the way of tried to scrape, because we didn't know exactly what that was going to be. And so, trying to, make sure that you have the ability to cover all those bases, and everybody has shifted responsibilities. Okay, everybody, there are things that I've done in operations to help out. There are things that Israel's done in curriculum to help out, because you're building a team to make sure that regardless of what comes up, that you're able to address those needs. And that's at all levels, and it's having a complete system. So,
and competent people.
All of those things, when you're talking about somebody that was not hired to do the job, okay, you have just a component of that. And when you're talking about, and I'm going to assume this is what you're saying, that, taking this position and having the project manager covering the buildings, that's not the case. As I said, there are building principals in those buildings during the summer. They're responsible for the things within their buildings.
But again, like what I had said to you was the summer school last year was in a building. So there are just questions. There are questions that I would like to see fleshed out. That's all. I just would like to see them made more concrete. If everyone doesn't agree with me, that's fine. You don't have to agree with me. I'm saying what I would be more comfortable with moving forward, and that I think should be just standard practice, that we're not always talking about being in crisis mode or being down people. We're talking about moving forward. What are the job responsibilities for this job? We've eliminated these job responsibilities here. We're moving them
That's
here.
exactly I think that's what we're talking about. We're talking about moving forward. We were in crisis mode, and now I think we're talking about moving forward. And so, I think that's exactly right. And I agree. Yeah.
But you have the option to vote no, right?
I absolutely
I think
do.
she's clear, but I'm actually interested in the questions that she has, and I'm trying to flush them out. So she does have the option to vote no, but I'm still interested to see what the concerns are.
Do you want to know what they are now?
Well, I mean,
think
so
she said-
maybe
I think I'm not-
to the specific question, maybe if there's more detail that you could provide with regard to the operations of the summer program at the next meeting. Okay.
Well, and for me, it's not just a summer program, it's also the after-school tutoring. It's because these Title I positions had very direct contact, and I believe Liz also spoke to this at a meeting, that the direct contact she had with Title I coordinators for the after-school program. So my specific interaction was with the summer school program, but I would like to hear how it's going to work for the after-school program. I just think we have to give more specifics as to how those tasks are going to be accommodated.
I mean, I think it's clear in an optimal environment, we would want two paid coordinators to do the job. We're just not in that environment anymore.
Okay, but now we've gone from 2 to none, and just those jobs being rolled into a project manager data analyst
But
job.
it's not only into
So-
his, it's not only into his.
Okay, but then show me where they're going.
I've seen it. I don't, if you look at the job descriptions, that were posted in our file. You see where the Title I coordinators' roles
I
and
only saw it
responsibilities.
going into the project manager.
They're
I didn't see
into
it
the
going
curri-
anywhere else.
My understanding is they're into the curriculum person as well. The
I didn't see
development for-
Title
the
I
development-
referenced there
The
anywhere.
development of those programs for the Title I is in the curriculum part. Is
I
that,
didn't-
is that correct?
Correct.
I didn't see the word Title I anywhere. I did look for it.
It doesn't,
I'm just asking for concrete specifics. I don't think that's
Okay.
a horrible thing.
All right, Darcy, thank you. Is there any other issues on the personnel? Any other discussion? Okay.
Ms. Aversa?
Yes.
Ms. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Bull?
Yes.
Ms. Simarusti?
No on 1 and 2, and yes, 3 through, what was it, 10?
Eight.
3 through, right, 3 through 8, and then 10.
Were we withdrawing number 9? Were we waiting?
Yes.
Yeah, it wasn't
We tabled
moved.
9.
It wasn't moved, yeah.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Ms. Sherber?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
yes.
Mr. Wharton?
Yes.
Adam, could we have a policy motion?
The policy committee did not meet tonight. I would like to move items 1 for second reading.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is there any discussion on any of those 3 policies?
The videotaping policy this video surveillance policy has the changes we spoke about. Just let everybody know.
I was glad to see that. I missed the last meeting, but I was glad to see the difference between the last meeting to this meeting.
Greg
Yeah.
had a good
Or
compromise.
the last meeting I was at.
Any other discussion? Linda?
Ms. Aversa?
Yes.
Ms. Berkowitz?
Yes.
Ms. Bull?
Yes.
Ms. Simarusti?
Yes.
Mr. Ross?
Yes.
Ms. Sherber?
Yes.
Mr. Sherman?
Yes.
Mr. Wharton?
Yes.
So for the President's report, I want to start with just sort of an update. I'm sure most of you in the room are aware of this. The board passed a resolution in support of Assembly Bill A3081, and on Thursday, May 15th, Darcy went down to Trenton and gave testimony to the Assembly Education Committee. And so I wanted Darcy, if you'd be so kind, to report out on the day and the result from the day.
Absolutely. I'd like to add that one thing I had asked is that maybe my testimony be put up on the website, and maybe we can start a little section for that resolution and how this moves through. Because for anyone who may not be aware, I know I certainly wasn't aware before I started doing all this stuff. You hear like it was passed by the Assembly Education Committee. You're like, yay, it's good. It's like, no, it's not good. We still have like this long, long way to go. It still has to go through the Assembly, and then it also has to get through first the Senate Education Committee and then through the Senate. The Assembly doesn't look like it's going to be much of an issue, but the Senate absolutely probably will be an issue. The chair of the Senate Education Committee is far less predisposed to a bill like this than the chairman of the Assembly Education Committee is, who you'll all be glad to know is our Assemblyman. And I could never be more proud of our Assemblyman Patrick Dignan than I am every time I go to Trenton and actually see and hear him in action. He's quite a thing to behold. One of the very telling moments for me of the hearing was at the very end of the hearing. The chairman was discussing, how he feels very strongly about this legislation and that we really need to take a strong look at what it is that we're doing, and not that anyone wants to completely stop these reforms, but we want to make sure that we get them right, and we want to make sure that, basically everyone is at the table to determine how we best move forward. And then he asked, is anyone here from the New Jersey Department of Education? And he just kind of looked around the room, and there was no response. And he just, right in the mic, went, I find that beyond annoying. And there is something very frustrating about that here is the Assembly Education Committee talking about these reforms that are coming down from the State Department of Education, and there's no representative there from the State Department to hear the feedback from all of the different organizations that were there. And one of the interesting pieces for me as well was that every single statewide organization that was there was in favor of this legislation, with the exception of the New Jersey School Boards Association. So I think as a board, we have some work to do, not only to get this through the Assembly and the Senate, but also to potentially work with our fellow boards across the state to kind of maybe make this within the School Boards Association more of a grassroots kind of thing, because it seems as if the association, for whatever reason, from the top down, has decided that they don't think that this legislation is a good idea, but the board members certainly representative on our board, and I think on other boards that I've spoken to across the state, certainly do think that some more time to take a look at these reforms is a good idea. And one of the other things that was very striking for me, and I won't take too much more time, was the testimony of the New Jersey Association of School Administrators. There were 5 superintendents, as I mentioned earlier, who took the time to come to Trenton, and only one testified, but they testified as a unit, and they were very clear in their position that they thought that the testing that was coming down the line really needed to be looked at, and needed to be looked at very strongly. And as I said before, their very clear opinion was that if the legislature does not take a look to start to put the brakes on some of this testing, that it would be the parents who would do that for them in this state. So I think that's an interesting takeaway from the meeting.
Can I comment on that?
Sure.
I just want to thank Darcy for representing Highland Park Board of Ed and going down to Trenton.
Thank you.
The night before, I went to a meeting about park presented by school boards, but it was presented by someone from the state, and it made me really worried about these park tests, because what? They have to do what? The kids are going to have to do what? How are we going to be able to judge schools and teachers and kids on this test, which we don't even have all the earphones for? Like, I didn't even know you needed earphones for the test. So that's a technology issue that we're going to have to manage. Now, the park test itself, when I did the practice test, which anybody can do if you go online, you know, they look
really hard.
fine. They look cool and really interesting, but I don't think we're at the point where we can actually make high-stakes decisions. And whenever I ask the state person, well, how are you going to do this? How are you going to do that? Like on the, excuse me, the multiple choice part of it, you can't actually, you know, like we teach kids, like eliminate the 2 answers that you know aren't right and then choose between the 2. You can't do that on a computer. So that's
actually, that you can do that for the park tests. We field tested Algebra 2. And for Algebra 2, so my issue with it was we spent an hour doing an infrastructure test. This was after IT had spent, hours and hours setting up the room. We then spent 2 hours and 45 minutes testing on the first day. That's from getting the kids in the room, getting them set up on the computer, et cetera, and then probably 2 hours on the second day. And so you're talking about almost 6 hours of time dedicated to one subject and only one of the 2 tests. Right. And so Algebra 2, for example, has 2 parts to it. One that's going to be in March and one that's going to be in May. And starting next year, there's going to be 3 of those, right? Algebra 1, Geometry, and Algebra 2, and also 3 for Language Arts. So you're talking about, it's a mind-boggling amount of time that is going to be taken for testing outside of, instruction. And it's, frankly, my experience with the Algebra 2 test was, as a math teacher, as a supervisor, I think my teachers would find the questions really interesting. And I think that a 10th grade student or an 11th grade student has no chance in doing well on it at all. Statewide, we're talking about 20% maybe passing with some, 60% proficiency.
Well, I wish for some reason I'm unable to connect to the internet right now, which is a little frustrating. But I wish I could read you some of the testimony of the superintendents. A lot of it was very much geared towards exactly what Dan's talking about, that once parents and even other educators start to understand what these tests are actually going to entail, the amount of time on task, that we're now not just talking about grades 3 through 8 and 11, we're talking every grade between 3 and 11, that the amount of time our children and our students are going to be dedicating to this is going to be just tremendous compared to what they're already doing. And I think what students are already doing is already, overwhelming to some parents. And they made a point also to point out that, very few districts across the state are technologically ready for park. They made a lot of very salient points to the legislature. And as I said, they are teaming up, and I want to say Essex, and I'll get the counties wrong, but in the 2 counties that the 5 of them represent, to specifically engage legislators in meetings to try, I mean, they're effectively lobbying, the legislature to try to get them to slow down this train. So, that is something that I would certainly, I think we should be reaching out as a board. I think we should be reaching out to other superintendents. I think we need to engage. I mean, again, we're very lucky that we have Assemblyman Dignan, who is our assemblyman, so we're pretty covered there. But in terms of the Senate, we need to start absolutely doing some outreach.
The last thing I want to say is, so after I was so worried that night, and then I heard Darcy was going, and then I read that the bill passed, I thought that was really good. There is an event on June 5th. It's called Legislative Day. It's being put on by the school boards and the New Jersey Parent-Teacher Association, and I passed out information. I'll try to put this on the website. If anybody's interested and can go down, all you have to do is pre-register. It's free, but they just need to know how many people are coming. So,
can non-board members go?
It's only for,
I think it's only for board members.
It's only for board members. Read at the bottom.
Yeah.
Yeah. Register today. There's no fee. There's no fee. Pre-registration is required if you are a school board member, charter school trustee, or a business administrator.
Yeah, it's just for board members.
Registering your board for this program, please register online at njsba.org. I'm reading the flyer about Legislative Day.
So am I, and I'm seeing it only says board members.
No, it doesn't. It says, if you are a school board member, charter school trustee, or business administrator registering your board for this program, please register online at NJSBA.
But I think all these programs are just for boards. They're not for the public.
We'll make a call to Gwen and check.
I don't know. Anyway.
So
Sorry.
So again, thank you, Darcy. 2 other things I want to talk about. The first is the meetings that were referenced, the meetings that were held, the parent meetings. I think what we're looking to do, and I think that the concerns that have arisen come from the fact that A, there's a question about representation, and B, there's a question about whether or not there will be more meetings. From my perspective, I think that we should have more meetings, and I think what I'd be looking to do is try to get information out publicly where we can set, let's say we'll set 2 dates or something like that, or 3 dates, and we can have a sign up that's something like the first 20 people, who do sign up, so that we could, we would obviously ensure some sort of more balanced representation. We would certainly make inroads into, we can reach out to community members or communities that are perhaps less well represented, but trying to set more of these up so that it's understood that the purpose of these conversations is actually to have a conversation. It's not to push any particular agenda. It's not to do anything other than provide parents who are concerned or who have particular concerns an opportunity to sit down with the superintendent and air some of those concerns. And at the end of the meeting, people still disagree, and that's okay, but at least then you've had that ability to have that dialogue. And certainly having the dialogue demystifies, the issues in quite a serious way. So I think that's one thing that I'd like to see moving forward.
I think our outlet was the school level meetings. I don't think if we put a meeting on, we should limit it in any way. The first 20 apply. It does not seem like something that we should follow or would follow. Anybody who wants to attend a meeting at any time with the superintendent is more than welcome to, in my opinion.
Sure, but I think there's a difference between people who want to. There's a difference between people who want to set their own meeting, in which case, obviously, that policy has been and will continue to be anyone who wants, and we take all comers. But if there's a specific meeting that's set, then that might actually provide an opportunity for people who aren't going to reach out individually, who aren't going to make that first step to say, you know what, I'll put my name on this, and I'll come in. And, keeping it to a sizable group, where there can be some discussion, I think there's a benefit to that. And obviously, doing it that way doesn't preclude any single person from having a meeting if they have a concern about an issue.
We're just going to have an issue of people locked out of these meetings.
So we'll have more. I mean, we want to provide people we want to provide people the opportunity to have a conversation if they want to have a conversation.
Right. And
if we put the invitation out and nobody is interested, then we'll know that there's no interest in it.
Right. But my concern is I think the way we set it up originally was with building level meetings as the appropriate outlet for the board to open meetings. I don't think we should set up meetings that are locked with a number, and if somebody wants to reach out, we can advertise that anybody can have a meeting with the superintendent, but we shouldn't set up limited meetings.
Thoughts? What are your thoughts?
I think I've been pretty clear.
I don't think that it's an either-or proposition.
Use the mic.
I don't think that it's an either-or proposition. I think that, there can be a wide assortment of the types of meetings that are available. I think the parent-requested meetings that that went so well last week are great, and that, any parent. But I don't see that as an impediment to setting up more sort of formal and established meetings. I think, well, that's all.
I tend to agree with Ann.
Yeah, no, one size doesn't fit all. I mean, something like the budget meeting that occurred, a couple of months ago, wide variety of folks there. So, yeah, I think it's.
So I'm just telling
not
board
either or.
members to get prepared for 10 emails. This meeting is locked.
Yeah.
I can't get into it. Why can't I get into it? That's not the way we do things.
That's actually what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Actually, that's exactly what I'm saying. If the parents are requesting it and it's a group of parents, then absolutely go ahead and have it with that group of parents. But if it's a formal presentation, it's
Right, and that's, I think, where I would make the distinction, is that if it's a matter of general public concern, like if there's an issue that's going to be discussed, obviously that would be something that would be held in public.
Yeah.
If you're talking about, we're going to have, it's a powwow, right? You have a group of people who are interested
I get what you're doing, yeah.
That's a sort of a separate thing. I don't think that anyone, it's certainly not my intent to say that a matter of public concern would be held in a private setting like that.
I just don't want to get the emails.
No, you're
but
right,
I-
and the way, I
Yeah,
understand.
and Dan
the way
is
you're
completely
saying,
right
not
on what
just-
he's thinking, on the way he's trying to do it, or not the way he's trying to do it, the way he's thinking about doing it. But
Right, so maybe we just have to be careful
Yeah.
the way it's communicated and lined up. But
Right.
if there is a small group of parents that arrange their own meeting, I think that's their prerogative.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. And we encourage everybody, and I think Tim himself has encouraged people to reach out to him. And I can't say that enough tonight, because I know people who have reached out to Tim and then rejected the meeting later on after he's accepted the meeting. So
I think to your point, though, Ashley, is that, that went well because it was about the budget. And if we were looking at other issues that came up or other topics, I think,
Right.
Melanie had raised, scheduling. If we're
Yes.
going to have something where you could have an open forum and you could have some discussion and dialogue, so it's not just, here's a PowerPoint and here's some components about it, but be able to sit and, really people that have an interest in that, having a topic and having a discussion about it, about the impact, about, really the integral pieces. The nice thing I thought in not just the two from last week, but the meetings that we've had as far as some of these small groups over time, has been the fact that, there is a dialogue. And the dialogue is the important piece, that there are follow-up questions, and, they can come and say, well, what about this, and what about that, and how does this fit together? And it really gives you an opportunity to have that discussion and be able to answer all the follow-up questions that are specific to their area of concern.
No, absolutely.
And I think something else that would be helpful is, if meetings like this are being established, which is clearly more than just like a couple of parents are getting together to talk about an issue with their child, or 3 parents are getting together to talk, and I mean, this was clearly something that was a little broader. I personally would have appreciated as a board member to get a heads up, just so that if something is blowing up in the community, I know ahead of time, I can try to head it off and say, no, this isn't this thing that you think it is, it's just this. That would have helped me tremendously. Things just started blowing up around
Yep.
me, and I had no idea what was going on.
That is
so
an excellent point.
I couldn't help diffuse it. And some of the things that were coming out made it sound not like it's being presented now. Some things that were coming out were like, well, the superintendent did ask for this, or the superintendent was going to preview a new presentation. And
So
so,
how
I mean,
do
there
you-
was all this other stuff that was floating around, and, you
So
can't
here's-
diffuse it if you don't know what's happening.
Sorry.
And I would have been
guess
happy to help diffuse it.
I guess the question that I have, and this is just a question, but how would a meeting like that, so like Tim has a lot of meetings with
Of course.
a lot of people, so how is that meeting, how would you like that meeting expressed to you in a way, I don't know.
Well, Dan, you went to this meeting, you knew about this meeting. none of us knew about that. And I think that's where the line is when it's in your vision that the full board should hear about it.
Okay, understood. All right.
I couldn't be more thankful than I am this past year that I am not on social media. Just saying.
No, and that's actually, if Matt's still here, that's why when he first said, "I'm happy," I kind of chuckled because I thought he was going to say, "I was happy I wasn't invited." Like, that was like how I thought he was going to finish that sentence.
Oh, I was just going to say, and it sounds silly, but there probably needs to be some guidelines. If you are informing us that it's occurring, if someone wants to participate, there's a limit on that. Am I correct? Right.
Yep.
So.
Oh, and I wasn't even saying because then I would have wanted to go. Just
yeah, no, I'm not.
Things are going on.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you are, but
like,
like,
no, it's not that. It's just a couple
kind
people
of like,
want to talk about.
I got you.
What happened that day? There was a phone conversation between me and Dan, me and Darcy, and just people. No one knew what was going on when the board received an email about it, and that's, I think, Darcy's point is well
understood. Well understood. Yeah. The last thing I want to talk about is the street fair.
Yes.
Tim was at the street fair with Susan Adato and the new Irving principal, Kelly Wisozanski. And it was a great day. Obviously, there were a lot of people out. Kelly met a lot of people who came up and said hello. It was a feel-good thing. There were beach balls and tattoos and all kinds of other things. So I want to thank her for coming out. Her official start date is
27th.
May 27th. So we very much look forward to her joining us at the district. It has been.
Tim, I just want to reiterate, I think you're the first person I know of superintendent who's done that, and I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And that concludes the president's report.
Wait, Ralph was there too. I don't think Ralph got a shout out.
Oh, Ralph
Israel,
was
were you
there.
there?
Yes, indeed.
I don't know who else was there.
Ralph was there. Ralph came later.
Being
That's
very
right.
gregarious.
Yeah. Is there any old business? I have some old business. The technology plan, we're looking at the presentation for the July board meeting, and I guess maybe for the next meeting, if we could have a couple of those dates set out so that we could have a timeline that we could notify people about times for those meetings and dates for those meetings so that we can have those meetings before.
So they've already started putting that together, and we were looking at both early meetings and later meetings, and we'll have a full schedule that'll be released. It should be this week.
And can we just clarify something? We're not talking about rewriting the full technology plan, correct? We're just talking, I don't want to ask the administration to take the time to rewrite the full plan. I think we need to have a strategic idea of what we're going to be doing in the next few years, but the state mandated
I think that the initial conversation is we've increased the funding for technology above what it's been in a I don't know if long time or ever. I don't know what the right word is. But we're looking at a circumstance now where there's been obviously things that Brian and the team put together in that plan that were not funded. Right. We've talked about infrastructure needs. We've already addressed the bandwidth issue. So it's kind of looking at the next ticket items and then building that out from there. Right. Whether that requires a complete rewrite of the plan, I would be surprised if it did. But it's really looking at it and saying, if this is $150,000 for this year, what's it going to be, and what's going to be the 3 to 5 year plans as far as what are the big ticket items. I know that Brian continuously talks about the switches, that he waits every day for the next switch to break. Right. So.
And I think some of the items just need to be fleshed out around it, like just to ensure that the technology that we are investing in is used. Right. The support around it, like the training, the professional development, the classroom engagement.
Well,
so it's the additional items that support the plan that I think people are looking for.
I think Tim's actually making the point is that, from my understanding, the last time I read it, that stuff is in the technology plan. My biggest issue with the technology plan was it didn't mean anything because we had no money to it. So we could say, well, we want. Now we actually have the money in it. And from my understanding, we have some of the money in it. From my understanding of what is in the plan from the last time I read it to what we're thinking about doing now is we don't need to rewrite what's in the plan, because I think in the plan is what we're doing. I think what we need to write is the expectations for this year and for next year in terms of the money that we have now. just
And
wanna say-
I would probably take a middle road on that. I would imagine that there's going to be portions that are going to be, improved, rewritten, whatever it may be. I don't think it's going to be a complete tear down. But I think the biggest part of the conversation has to be, now that this money has been allocated, and what are we looking at doing in years to make sure that the infrastructure, actually, we've talked about this, and you made the point about the cycling, right? That we can't make a one-time purchase and wait 10, 15 years to not, we have to have a plan in place that makes sure that we maintain the technology that we have and that we have a plan for replacement.
I just want to set expectations, so when somebody comes and asks us, are we planning on resubmitting a technology proposal to the state, or are we planning on keeping the one that we have now as our proposal with the state? I think that's just an important distinction that, or you don't know yet, might be an answer.
Well, we can always resubmit it. Like I said, we have a plan. We have to see where it is. And again, just in some of the conversations I've had, I spoke with a parent that works in the IT field and was saying, I'd be willing to volunteer, not just for the plan, but as far as they do strategic planning for technology. So, and again, one of the problems we had the last time was the timing. So we are looking at multiple meetings, different times, to make sure that we have larger contingent of people that are able to attend. And we'll see what comes from it.
Okay, is there any other old business?
I have a couple things that I hope will be relatively quick. They continue to revolve around communications, and I've brought them up previously, and I want to circle back to them because I think they've become relevant in terms of responses to emails that get sent into the board. I know now we don't get the volume that we were getting at one point, which I think makes it maybe the ideal time to readdress this. Brian McFadden DiNicola brought this out last time, and I had brought this up a few months back, that according to our bylaws, Dan, and please don't take this as me trying to put something else on your shoulders, but the bylaws do currently say that the president shall have responsibility to reply to written communications. If that's something as a board that we don't want moving forward, then I think we should have a discussion of how we do want to respond, but I don't think that we can continue to have emails coming in to the board account in good faith that get no response other than the automated response. And I'm not saying that you have to be the one to respond, but if that's not how we want to do it, then we need to decide how we do want to do it. Or if we say, we're not going to respond in writing, but we will respond at the next board meeting, or we have some way to respond so it's not just emails go into thin air.
What's the bylaw, just so I can have it?
It's the one that actually we specifically changed to accommodate moving public comment. It's 0164, conduct of board meetings.
Oh.
And under the last section, which is communications, it's the Board of Education recognized that from time to time written communications may be received that should be brought to the attention of the board in public. The president shall direct the superintendent to distribute copies, which we don't have to do because it's all coming in via email. The president shall have responsibility to reply.
Okay.
And if we want to change that, that's fine.
It doesn't say reply in writing.
It is a shall, though, right? It is shall.
Yeah, it doesn't actually say reply in writing.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. If we don't want it to be in writing, we should at least say
Well, the
how it
policy
is.
doesn't say.
Well, but
And
it
it says
says you
shall.
shall reply. So, I mean,
Shall is not, shall is a may. Shall is the equivalent of may.
No, shall is the opposite of
No.
Shall means you must.
no.
Shall means must.
Take it from the guy who went to law school. I'll take it from the guy who went to law school.
May and must.
Shall is not a must, though.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
Okay, thanks, Darcy.
So can we put that
Shall
on
from time to
for
time.
something to discuss at a future date, or how do we go about that?
Well, I have no problem replying to emails. I think that the question, I guess, is, and maybe this is a structural question that I've sort of not known the answer to for a long time, but if anybody responds to an email, how does everybody else on the board know that a response has been made?
Right.
So if Tim, we can't actually copy, but,
Right.
so the question is,
You can. You're allowed to copy every single one of us.
But don't you think some of the things that you really maybe, you even can't respond? I mean,
for every email, should I respond to it and then send an email to everyone saying this email was responded to?
You only
Or-
speak for the board when you're here.
Which is why
Right,
that
and there's,
automated
I just feel like
response
there's
goes
certain
out.
things that come through on email that you really shouldn't respond to because
Well,
it's
but
not in
I
your
could
realm.
respond by saying,
Right,
you know.
but you just have to have
But
a
you
blanket,
can't-
like, I'm sorry,
But you can't say you speak for the board. You can't say you speak for the board when you're not at a board
May I
table.
comment?
Yeah.
Every email is responded to by me, indicating that the board has received the email, an acknowledgement of receipt.
But that's
Just wanna
different than
make
getting
sure-
a response to the content. I mean, I
It's
know
not-
that we
it's not
send
an
that out.
answer.
Right, exactly. But that's what I'm...
Questions.
Right.
And not every email is a question.
But and the person's emailing the Highland Park Board of Education. We are only the Highland Park Board of Education when we are sitting at this table. The moment we disband from a 5-member quorum, we are no longer members of the Highland Park. We are no longer representative of the Highland Park Board of Education, and that's Board Training 101.
Well, I mean, then maybe this is something we consult with Gwen on and
Yeah,
specifically
you don't wanna
bring her
hear what Gwen's
in
gonna-
to ask. Well, I mean...
Well, what is Gwen going to say?
Gwen's going to say you
response, but I don't think
don't.
we
Gwen
need
is going to say you don't respond via email at all, I would think.
Okay, so then that means that our policy makes no sense.
Right,
Well,
exactly.
but
Right. I mean, so
but
something's
it
going to
has-
get...
So let's
Can I-
get clarification.
Weigh in here for
Absolutely.
a second?
Oh, no.
Hey, Dan? Dan? I mean, one of the things here, I think, is that you're responsible to see that the email is responded to, is the way I have understood this in the past, so that Linda's response is a response. Many of these emails also need to go to the administration because they're actually administrative issues. So you're responsible for seeing that the administration is responding to those issues. That's the way I've always interpreted.
Right, but that's actually not what it says, though. And so I
Okay,
guess
so
maybe that's the
then we
issue.
need to
Yeah.
change the language.
So I'll reach out to Gwen about it, and I'll ask her
Okay.
what the story is.
And then another email that we received over the last couple of weeks was specifically asking for one board member specific address because they wanted to follow up with that person about something that they had discussed. And we had decided, I believe, as a board to put up individual addresses, brief bios, and then that I think we all submitted our bios, but then it seemed to have died there.
It did fizzle. So this is another question, because if you send a message to the board, should you, so Adam, maybe you would know, can you send a message to a board member of a matter of public concern or yes?
Anybody can stop any board member, have anybody's email address at any time and reach out to that board member. The board member should not respond in any substantive way, speaking on behalf of the Board of Education. They only can speak on their opinion, but their opinion also doesn't really matter because you're only you're not a constituted board.
So we should put the individual email addresses on the website. That seems like a no-brainer.
That's fine, but
No, they're still not.
the individual
And we had done
board,
brief bios also, or at least I did. I mean, we were
Yeah.
asked to do brief bios and submit them.
individual board members should individual board members should
I'll help
not
you,
be.
right?
You're the one waiting. You're the reason.
That's fine, you're waiting on me. I'll get to it in my spare
Yeah.
time.
So
But do you want to get into the practice of individual board
no, I
members?
was just about to say that. Yeah.
Right, addressing
Individual
their own
board-
opinion that might compromise the board as a whole.
Individual board members should not be responding to particular issues on their own. The appropriate place for a board member to do that is at the board table.
And could we just put a tag on every outgoing email that says that this is not the opinion, like, the disclaimer?
When we run for our seats here, that's what we do. But we don't. It's a very fine line, and it's.
Well, I mean, I think we all
Maybe
understand
something
that.
else that we can ask Gwen
Yeah,
about.
but we've worked very hard to delineate those two sections.
All right, I'll follow up with her.
Yeah.
And I'll let you guys know this week. Is there any other old business? Is there any new business?
I have one quick item. That is probably going to kick me under the table. In terms of the budgeting process and transparency around the budget, while recognizing that we can't provide quarterly reports and there's a significant burden on that, it would be good if we could provide. Sorry, yeah, I know. Provide updates in terms of, in an easy to digest format of where we are against budget and a breakdown of those expenses.
We provide that.
We see it on a line item, but it's not in an easy to digest format, I would suggest.
It's 12 lines.
Not in terms of the categories.
we produce a monthly financial report that's submitted for board approval.
Yeah, no, I see that. What I'm saying is that there's companies that put out a very graphical, easy to digest format. It's actually called AGA format for public consumption. It's the kind of thing you would typically see in an annual report. It's a one-pager. It provides a very easy to digest overview. Because I think where am I going here?
Is this the municipalities thing that you showed us?
Yes, it is. It's exactly the municipalities. Most nonprofits, most publicly traded. So the whole issue, even though we put that out, even though the monthly report is put out, and there's nothing wrong with the monthly report, but it does require some studying and some knowledge. We get to the point at the end of the year when the new budget is coming up for discussion, and everyone's kind of blindsided. So the approach would be to put it together in a format that prevents that blindsiding once we hit the next budget cycle, so that everyone knows where we are, where the deficits are, where the spending is going in each category.
Can you email that to Catherine, Catherine and Linda?
Isn't there a data lag with the bills?
Yes.
I mean, don't we get bills? Don't we review bills now that were January or February?
October.
Yeah, and it's not a criticism of the actual accounting process. It's or the way the finance.
What I'm saying
finances
is there a way for us to provide that information if we have such a data lag?
Right.
That's the question, not a critique.
The surplus. We don't know what, like at the end of the year, we don't know what our surplus is right now because we still haven't gotten our January bills. That's what he's asking.
I'm not following you.
My question is, I think it sounds like a great idea. If you have up-to-date accounting where you know exactly what you've spent and you know what you have left at each time point, then that's much more doable, but we have
but we get bills a month and a half after.
That's what he's saying.
Like utility bills, it might be 6 weeks
That's what I'm
after
saying.
the fact. So it's never going to be like right on time, like today, this is where we are today, and tomorrow, this is where we'll be. It's always going to be delayed
And our encumbrances lines show that right now.
And for items
there's
like
a lot of things that haven't been booked into the expenditures yet, and we're not allowed to.
and you don't accrue.
We're not allowed to
accrue.
encumber for the whole year, no.
Okay.
But maybe but I think the point is well taken.
Yes.
I think we should look at maybe a simple way to present the data regarding the budget as best we can given the confines or the parameters that we have.
You know, in the next month, we're going to have a conversation of how much surplus we have at the end of this year. We're going to have about one board meeting between when we get pretty much our last winter bill. And
No, we won't even have our last winter bill.
We won't even have
We
it.
have to project out what we think the bills are going to be before we end our year. And then, you know, it's mid-August by the time we finally know the answer
So
to that.
we'll be finished with the fiscal year and have to move our surplus wherever we want to move it or return it without even having our final bills.
Gotcha.
But you could send that to the board and to Linda, maybe the AGA.
I will send it. Again, and it's not
information.
a critique of what currently exists. I just feel that there's a way to present the data that, you know,
And I agree.
will make it more publicly accessible.
I think we all agree, we have some restrictions that have to be built into that model. But that does bring up my question, Linda. Soon, we should have the surplus number discussed whenever you have a chance to really project it out.
I've been in discussions with the superintendent on this matter.
Okay.
And he's still, we're still making decisions on what
I
the needs are. I'm sure Mr.
Needs, I just
Capone
like to
would be
know, I
happy
would like to know what the dollar figure is going to be. I know we can't really project it now, but starting June 1st, we should be able to get a better understanding of what that dollar figure is going to be.
Is there any other new business? Highland Park Board of Education welcomes public participation and has reserved this time for your comments. Is there any public comment? Okay, we need a motion for a resolution to go into executive session at 6:30 p.m. on June 2nd, 2014 at Bartle School to discuss personnel, litigation, and negotiations.
So moved.
Is there, all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? And we need a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you, everyone, for coming out.
Nope, I don't have a card.